All right, today is March the 28th in 2026, and we have two guests today. This is going to be a special episode. We have Tomas Pueyo here, the author of Uncharted Territories, and we have Trey Goff here, the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Policy of Prospera. So this is the third episode with Trey, actually. So there is a tradition we've established of Trey, Nick, Riff, and Ramble. And this time we're doing it actually being interviewed by Tomas,
Yes.
who is very curious about hearing about the long-term strategy of Prospera and Infinita. So with that, I'll give the mic and the moderation to you.
Thank you, Nick. And yes, I'm super excited about this because I think you know this, most people don't know this, that there's not enough jurisdictions in the world. We're not testing enough the rules of the game. They have been fixed for many decades because there's no more countries, there's no more jurisdictions, there's no more cities, really. And so what you guys are doing is not just yet one more settlement or just like a community. It is a way to change the rules of the game on how we create wealth and happiness. Right, so that's how I think about this. And you guys, I think, are special because you were among the first, and you are among the biggest. And so all of these things are super exciting. So I wanted to spend some time with you to understand deeply how things started here, and then where you think it can go, and the nitty-gritty of the challenges that you have, and how you're hoping to grow. Does it make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Perfect. So I'd love to start, and I think the history is interesting, but we can write about this. I can write about this a bit more. But so I'm interested in the history on how the SEC started in Honduras and whatnot, and then Prospera specifically at a high level to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can tell the story up to when Niklas came. So I'll start from kind of first principles, like why are we doing this? Why did we end up doing this in the first place? And it's a pretty straightforward story, which is trying to pull the biggest lever we can to increase and maximize the prosperity of the highest number of people in the world effectively. So if you take a huge step back and think like what are...
Very ambitious.
Exactly. And so at the concept level, right, what are the biggest levers you can pull to do so? There's this great field of economics called institutional economics that looks at exactly this, right? What makes, at an institutional nation-state scale, some places prosperous and others not. And Douglas North, one of my favorite economists, he won the Nobel Prize back in the 1990s and invented this field by basically pointing out that, hey, the governance institutions, as well as the cultural institutions, but primarily governance, which what I mean by institutions here, because it sounds like a technical term.
The rules of the game.
The rules of the game. It's exactly right. The water in which we all swim that we kind of take for granted.
Yeah.
That is the key ingredient. If you're looking for one, obviously prosperity is multi-causal. But if you're looking for the biggest causal factor, that's it, the quality of and structure of your governance institutions primarily. As you mentioned previously, the governance institutions of the world have been quite static for a long time. I mean, you could trace this back, if you want to trace it back to as far as possible to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1492 that created the modern system of nation states, right? And since then, we've effectively been operating more or less in this nation state kind of institutional structure, right? And it has, created modernity. I'm not at all saying there's specifically that this is a bad thing or anything like that. The point is just there's no innovation happening at that layer. So if you're trying to find the biggest lever to pull, the thing to innovate on to improve the actual human flourishing of the largest number of people, well, it would be improving governance institutions. So you have a couple ways you can do that, right? You can first do the traditional method, which is like, hey, I'm going to go become a politician, get elected somewhere. I'll go, lobby a government to have a public policy change or whatever. But unfortunately, because these institutions haven't changed in so long and kind of just the state of the world as it exists, that unless you have billions of dollars, and even then, it's very hard, and unless you have billions of dollars, it's nigh impossible to do so, at least for places that matter, that are like large, like the United States, or even for smaller places where you can have the largest marginal effect.
There's so many vested interests already, and it's very, very hard to fight all the people who want the status quo or barely change it.
Exactly. They make money from this. It's how they exist. So they're happy to have things as they are. So that then brings up the question, all right, well, how do you change things, reform things, improve things deeply enough, given that is the lay of the land, the what is so, right? And the way to do that is we think, through a special jurisdiction, kind of zone-based approach. The reasoning is pretty straightforward. The reason the nation scale institutions are hard to change, you just nailed it perfectly. A bunch of vested interests have quite a large incentive to keep them that way. But if you do this on a zone basis, which all that means really to translate that is just like a constrained geographic area, right? It's not the whole country, it's a spot, right? Then you can avoid a lot of that ire of those existing elites that want to keep things as they are and profit from things as they are, because you're not shaking up their monopoly. They're the thing that keeps them so wealthy, You're instead just focusing on a narrow piece. I'll pause 1 second. Oh no, you're fine. Thank you so much.
Getting some drinks here.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Clearly.
Thank you.
Camera.
Yeah. Cheers, everybody.
Right. Cheers. So creating special zones where you can actually deeply reform and innovate on the layer of governance. Okay. So that's call it the philosophical conceptual grounding. Okay. The actual real nuts and bolts of how this happened is our founder CEO Eric Bremen. Before we focused on Honduras, we were working with we were a firm called New Way Capital, and we were first looking to identify projects like what Prospera is today to invest in, based on the same thesis. The thesis is exactly the same. And what we found was there really weren't any. No one was doing this. There was no deal flow, to put it in finance terms, at all. So we said, all right, well, we have to do it. So we looked at basically every country in the world, because we know how hard it is. I have a background in public policy. I've passed legislation in Mississippi at the state level, so I know how hard that is. And a bunch of the guys on the team had done this at a higher level, so we knew that's hard. And to do the thing we need to do, it's going to be doable, but very hard. So instead, we're like, let's find a place that already has legislation that would enable us to create a special jurisdiction, a zone, to deeply reform and improve the governance institutions. And just through no effort of our own, when looking around doing this, Honduras already had such a legislation with the Zete law. The framers of this law, Carlos Pineda and Octavio Sanchez and others, were just visionaries who thought this through carefully and built a robust, great piece of legislation to do nail on the head, basically exactly what we think is necessary to drastically improve.
And so that's interesting because there were already so many SEZs in the world, right? So
over 7,000.
So what made Honduras special?
So traditional SEZs have a lot of kind of fatal flaws. They often are just too narrowly scoped. If you look at your typical SEZ somewhere in the world, it is a few tax breaks, maybe some rebates, some subsidies. Maybe if you're lucky and it's a particularly good SEZ, some of the permitting and legal and regulatory compliance institutions have a streamlined process for the zone. But there's not actually a deep level of reform of actually fundamentally rethinking and changing the institutional factors that matter for economic growth and for unleashing human prosperity.
Okay, let me sure I understand. What I'm hearing you say is most SEZs, what they do is low taxes and streamlined paperwork.
Correct.
What else beyond that do you want?
All right. But the way we think of this is kind of root access to put it in kind of technology terms. Root access to be able to rethink the day-to-day legal, regulatory, and governance institutions from the ground up. So that means being able to start from as close to a blank slate as possible, in partnership with and with oversight from the host nation, of course, and with some guardrails, in a sandbox, so to speak, is the kind of term of art here in the public policy world.
Yeah.
But within that sandbox, be able to innovate, to do things better, to what we've done, which is adopt best practices from around the world, institute regulatory reciprocity so that you can pick and choose the best legal and regulatory environments, institute some other things that are more novel that can have a profound impact on the ease of doing business, all toward just unleashing the untapped potential of people, to get the institutional boundaries out of their way, to create governance institutions that help them rather than actively thwart them and add friction to their flourishing.
You need to create different laws, right? Make different rules. That's the important thing. So, which is, traditionally the power of a sovereign country. Now, Honduras had a very clever idea because they were creating a sandbox within their constitution saying that these special economic zones exist and they're kind of similar to a municipality. And they have a public entity that is run by a Honduran national, a so-called technical secretary or a mayor. And then that entity can partner with a private for-profit entity. Right, so that system created that flexibility sort of to bring in the power, the efficiency of the private sector and sort of making rules in sort of a market competition way, but also is still within sort of the sovereign framework of a traditional nation state.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. In this regulatory world of things that we want to change, that's a broad picture of things, right? The services that government brings are many, right? There's everything from tax redistribution to crime, management, which you can break down into police and the judicial system. You have industry level regulation for specific each one of the industries. So there's a bunch of these things. Which ones of the things matter the most for a new jurisdiction, and which ones matter the least? And I assume there's kind of a gradient there, but also kind of buckets of these are the things I really care about, these are the things that we don't really care about, and then things in the middle. So how do you think about this?
Correct. So I'll give you our perspective. And actually, Niklas and I haven't ever talked about this specifically, so I'd love to hear your take on this. From my perspective, at least, the most important things are also the things that matter the most in terms of enabling entrepreneurs and people to build things. So it's stuff we typically take for granted. It is the rule of law. So to translate that, all that means is will the rules, whatever they may be enforced fairly, impartially, rapidly, and efficiently, right? So rule of law, no corruption, basically, is an easy way to translate
Well, no corruption, but also no bureaucracy, speed in the tribunals and things like that, right?
That's exactly right. And it's not necessarily no bureaucracy. It's just if you're starting from, this is why I said blank slate earlier. That's a really important kind of conceptual framework. If you're starting from a position where you can rethink a lot of these things, from the ground up, from first principles, learning from how other places work and don't, then things like bureaucracy can become much more efficient, technology-enabled processes, or thinking about how to structure the incentives that are kind of created by these governance institutions to obviate or at least reduce the need for some of this bureaucracy as well, which we can get into later, like decentralized regulatory enforcement, stuff like that. So rule of law, protection of and enforcement of property rights. Again, one we often take for granted, but especially in the developing world, places like Honduras or otherwise.
And by the way, just one side note here, I think that's relevant. When I'm using a mental framework that I think might be useful here is in comparison to what exists, right? And to me, what exists, the three jurisdictions that have been the most successful in the world in the 20th century are Singapore, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and Dubai. Correct. And then Shenzhen, Hong Kong is slightly different because it's like China, right? So I think Singapore and Dubai, to me, are the baseline, right? And so what I'm hearing you say, the regulation and these things like rule of law and whatnot, it sounds to me like this is also what we see in places like Singapore and Dubai. And that makes sense to me. And so I'm interested in context of, what are the things that are similar to Dubai and Singapore, and what are the things that are different?
Mm-hmm. So for very similar to Singapore and Dubai, actually. I mean, we looked at these as case studies of all right, how do we make this work? Clearly it works there. What can we learn from that to apply here? Yeah. The things I'm listing right now aren't exactly the things that they
But it's good, and it's great to go through them. It's just as a mental framework for me, it's these are the things that are very important, and those happen to be similar, and
I would
others are different.
have a bit of a broader framework.
Okay.
That's whenever you think of a project like that, there's three factors you want to look at and how strong or weak you are there, which is demand, infrastructure, and jurisdiction, right? So demand is, for example, if you have a lot of people that need to go somewhere and you're very close to them, right? So that was an advantage of Hong Kong because lots of mainland Chinese needed or wanted to go there, right? So demand is very important. Infrastructure, people don't move into the desert or in the Antarctica. Right, so the infrastructure needs to be at a certain level or a certain place to deliver on that demand. And then jurisdiction is the rule-making ability. But if you're very strong in some of the other things, you don't need to be able to change that many rules, right? But Prospera is a case where jurisdiction is sort of the most deepest part, right? So there's a lot you can change. So that means, you can attract biotech or crypto because you can make business regulations and things like that. So no project has all three at the same time, but I think in generally for new jurisdictions,
that makes a lot of sense. So I hear you. I'm trying to get a mental framework, my head wrap around this concept of demand, infrastructure, and jurisdiction. Why these three?
I mean, it's just synthesizing from several other projects that I've seen, right? So for example, I think in Prospera here, but very strong with jurisdiction, right? There is no other place that has as much rule-making ability, right? So we can literally make the financial laws, the laws for medical services. You can incorporate a business here, and there's rules for that. We have the arbitration and courts. And
so let me rephrase to make sure I understand. What I'm hearing you say is for a new community or city to emerge, you can have different competitive advantages. One might be you're close to another one, so you don't need to be much better. You can just attract by being slightly better. Another one might be you have amazing infrastructure, and that naturally attracts people. And then another one might be jurisdiction. And then the more of these that you have, the better, right? So you mentioned Shenzhen, like had definitely population. Well, Shenzhen was pretty small and Hong Kong was pretty small early on, but they have jurisdiction, and the British put infrastructure in Hong Kong, and then blah blah. So
I mean, more like quality of the jurisdiction. I mean, it could be that you have full jurisdiction, but you're not using it in that clever or sophisticated ways necessarily.
Okay,
and. Perhaps I like this mental model, so I'm going to play with it a little bit. Let's apply it to an example that didn't work very well, or like kind of worked, but not really, which is Songdo, South Korea. Songdo, South Korea was a new city built in the like 2000s, 2010s. One of the developer of that was a private company that partnered with the South Korean government, which funded it to build a new city, not too far outside of some of their other major cities, but it's an hour to 2 hours from their other major cities.
Where it's like south of Seoul, or exactly on the coast.
Right. Yes, that's exactly right. And so in fact, just as an aside, the reason I know a lot about this particular example is because one of the executives that built that, a gentleman named Tom Murcott, who is a dear friend and is one of our directors here at Prospera.
Okay.
So he helped us learn what worked and didn't work there. Okay. So to put it into Niklas's framework, which I think is very helpful, they had some demand, but not a lot. They crushed the infrastructure. So if we're talking about the three here, let's give them a score of 0 to 10. They were like a 9.5 out of 10 on the. They had a bunch of innovative stuff, like this pneumatic trash system where it's like a bunch of pneumatic pipes that would just suck your trash to the landfill. There's no garbage trucks, that kind of stuff. They crushed the infrastructure, extended the high-speed rail lines into the city, had their own airport. Like, could not have been better infrastructure, unironically, but was not huge demand because some other major cities, including Seoul and others, are nearby. But it was far enough away.
Yeah, 2 hours too far.
Too high friction. And then they didn't do almost anything on the legal regulatory jurisdiction SEC front. Very, very little. There were like some small tax incentives and stuff like that. There was very little advantage there. They just thought, if we build a new city that has great infrastructure, people will come. And there's some great write-ups. If you just Google it, you can see the pictures and images from this. The maps are cool, where you can see they built this cool, amazing city with this golf course and a central park, these new giant buildings that are all networked together, all this smart city stuff. And they have like a third, roughly, of the population that they had expected. And this is after like over a decade.
Was that supposed to be the new capital or something like this?
I don't think it was supposed to be it was supposed to be a new business center, basically, the commercial hub.
And in the article, I give some other examples. So I think Prospera is where jurisdiction is very strong. Infrastructure is not weak. I mean, we do have pretty good roads by being already on Roatan. That's developing in some ways. But, it's definitely not a 10 out of 10, maybe 5 out of 10 or something. And demand is actually quite challenging. There was not sort of a clear customer profile in Prospera in the beginning, right? So we developed that over time, and now we're going sort of to frontier entrepreneurs and things like that, which is kind of, I think, historically a bit of an anomaly when you compare it to many other projects that we've been able to do that. And then if you look at the network school, for example, by Balaji, so excelling in demand, right? Because he is, we met there. Because he has a very big reach, so he gets a lot of people there. Infrastructure is also pretty good, so he took over much of dormant real estate, and there's a lot available there already, where we have to build up a lot more. But jurisdiction, there is no rulemaking ability, right? So they were having challenges such as, technically they had to gender segregate the elevators and things like that because it's a Muslim country, right? So they aren't exempt from relevant rules for a sort of international population, right? And for the kind of things they want to do for advancing tax and things like that. And a third example that I think is doing actually really well on its own that's not often talked about is Ciudad Morazan, the other charter city project here in Honduras. So I think they did really well in hitting kind of the sweet spot. Right, so in jurisdiction, they're Honduran Zede, just like
hold on, because I want to hear it. But you're making me think of one thing, and I think if we add it, it might be even more relevant.
Yeah.
The way I'm thinking about these three things that you're talking about, to me, is a marketplace. Okay, in a marketplace, you have supply and demand. Here, the demand is for people to come and visit and leave eventually, right? And the question is then, what would be the supply? And to me, in the supply, which is all the services that you need to live properly, there's one thing that is way more important than anything else, which is jobs, right? the number one reason why people go to cities is because of the aggregation effects of jobs. Right. And so that to me is very helpful of supply and demand, because now we're talking about marketplace, we're talking about network effects that are very much the same thing as we have in cities, right? So if we use that mental framework, then jurisdiction and infrastructure, they are two ways of getting supply.
Correct.
Like jobs,
Exactly.
right? And then that helps for demand. It is not the only thing. And so if we go back to the, for example, network school thing, they're like, I'm not taking care of supply at all quite yet. I'm going to work a lot on the demand side and like come with your jobs because you are all remote workers. And we're going to cover all the other parts of supply, not just works, but rather, gyms and like lifestyle and all that stuff and community, but just not works. And so now back to what you're saying on Ciudad Morazán, I think that's where relevant because it's kind of the opposite aspect, right? So go for it.
Yeah, so I think they hit a sweet spot really well. So they have a lot of jurisdiction, just the same as we here, but their set of rules is less sophisticated and less complex. It's simple enough, right? So the transaction costs to maintain it are lower, and their demand is Honduran blue-collar workers. They're right next to one of the most dangerous regions in the country. What do people that are there need the most? It is safety and it is a roof, right? And they actually did custom interviews, like the way that you're taught in Lean Startup and all of that. Like they went to talk to the people, right? And they got them what they need, which is, okay, here is really affordable housing, like $150 a month, and gates, security gates and security, right? So that was very nicely sort of fitting the demand that was there and sort of getting the minimum viable infrastructure to people.
So if that makes sense, if I can rephrase it into the mental framework that I was using, is like the demand was there, a big chunk of the supply was there, which is the job part, but that's not everything you want.
The
And
job
so they
part is
added other
actually,
aspects to
it's
it.
an important nuance, right? Because Morazán was supposed to work out as a kind of a company town because you have large space for warehousing. Because the founder, Massimo, is a pharmaceutical retailer, distributor. So he would have gotten very large companies in and big tax advantages for them and jobs to the local population, right? So it really speaks to his ability that, when the government, the socialist government came, they wanted to shut it down. Obviously, you didn't get the large businesses in, right? Because it's too big of a risk for them. But it was still enough. And it's very interesting for the residents. So now it has 300 people living there. And it was just enough to sort of be cost sustainable on the residential side alone. But you're right in that you kind of need to work backwards from what are the engines of growth or job creation.
And that was the goal of Ciudad Morazán originally, right? Is actually to have this industrial city there. So it's interesting, but you're saying they didn't have that, and yet they had other aspects of the jobs to be done that were covered to attract people.
And I mean, that's in a way what I tried to do for the last 4 years, to find sort of that growth lever industry for Prospera, what can catalyze that. What attracted
and I want to go into this, right?
Yeah.
Super important. I think it's important to go back a little bit in the history, right? And so because we're talking about the value of the jurisdictions, right? And from what's really matters of owning and controlling versus what doesn't, and then and go from there. Does it make sense?
Yeah, of course. So rule of law, clear title to property rights. And then very clear, the bucket I would use here is very clear business-friendly rules. So this is the statute level regulation. I'm at a higher level of abstraction than that. I'm talking about specific statutes or regulation or whatever. It's more just kind of a simple framework of like, do the rules make sense? Do they protect the public interest, the public good, the public health, while also maximally allowing entrepreneurs and individuals in the jurisdiction to like build things that create value?
Yeah.
Those are the three biggest buckets that we care the most about. The fourth and final one is dispute resolution. So this obviously goes hand in glove with the others, which is, can you count on having rapid, judicious, impartial resolution of disputes?
Yeah.
Those are the four biggest kind of non-negotiable buckets for us. And by non-negotiable, I don't mean like, we have to have maximum control of all of these things. What I mean is an element of some of those things, and this is very much a gradient and it's ambiguous, like on a very down to the project by project level, basically, if you're evaluating these, of, do we have enough of, can we count on the rule of law through this, whatever the existing, special economic zone framework is? Well, what about, title to property and having clear property rights? Well, all right, well, what about, having clear and easy to follow rules? What about having, efficient, rapid dispute resolution that is as immune from corruption as is possible? So these are all, they're hard and fast in the sense of like the buckets are very clear to me, When you get down to the granular level of like what specific detail matters more, it very much has to be taken in totality and depends on the specific circumstance. Because to Niklas's point, right? Let's imagine, I'm making this up, but like let's imagine a hypothetical where you're building one of these outside of Austin, Texas. Okay? No such zone law exists there, but like just go with me for a second. Well, in that case, I'd be pretty willing to give a lot more on literally all four of these because A, it's the United States. They already have pretty good rule of law, pretty good protection of property rights. I don't even need much there. The regulatory environment can be pretty bad, so I would try to push to have as much of an improvement there as possible. The courts are pretty good there, so I'm not really worried about dispute resolution. So really if I'm building one outside of Austin, right, because Niklas's framework's great here, we're right next to a big major, metropole, and it should be pretty straightforward to be able to build infrastructure that you already have, interstate highways, airports nearby, so you don't have to build those things. The infrastructure is already pretty good. So in that case, right, we'd be much more willing to, have a less robust, let's say, special economic zone law. Contrast that with here, right? Basically, all of this is super important because you don't have those other things. You don't have the demand. You don't have the infrastructure. You don't have the supply. None of it. Yeah. So, you got to, in that case, all right, well, now the actual jurisdiction matter is of paramount importance because that is what will enable you to do the other things.
And so that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm hearing you say is, in the supply and demand thing, the jobs is always the most important thing. For the jobs, the competitive advantage to get the businesses there, the key that you can do much better than in other places is these rules where many businesses cannot do what they want to do elsewhere, and so they can come here.
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of the end user, the rules are the back end, not the front end, right? So the front end to someone who wants to move there is the job that might pay more, or sort of the better amenities or the quality of life, or like other people that have. That's the front end.
Yeah.
The back end, the rules is what you can build on, right? So that's ideally speaks to other businesses that then create the front end for users. But as we know, like a strong back end can make a huge difference for businesses. Like when you talk about biotech, it's like, okay, why do we do trials this way? Okay, change a thing, and you could reduce the costs by like 10 times or by 100 times even.
And that is indeed like a good segue on this one. I'm not going to bite it quite yet. We're getting there. Because here you've talked about what is important, right? You haven't talked about yet what isn't, but also which one of these pieces were unique of Honduras versus, say, Dubai.
Sure. So basically all of this was fairly unique for Honduras. So for Dubai, I'm going to set, if we're comparing just the jurisdictions, Dubai is great. They have their own system of special economic zones. Most people don't realize this. Dubai is just like a conglomeration of 20-something special economic zones focused on industry by industry with their own improved legal and regulatory environment. But setting that aside, just for us particularly, it's too far away. Like literally, we wouldn't even consider that. It's because none of our team is that we're all either U.S. based or Latin America based.
I see.
So it was literally just too far afield.
So Western Hemisphere.
That's exactly right. Western Hemisphere, at least to start. Now, eventually, of course, the goal is to have a bunch of zones creating prosperity all over the world. But at least for starting, right? Sure. But from a jurisdiction perspective, Dubai's great. They have basically almost all of these things. Now, for what doesn't matter as much, or the things you're more willing to just say, whatever. That's a really good question.
If you work backwards from what we have right now, so basically we have almost anything except for immigration, criminal law, and national defense.
So you do not have that.
No.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Correct. Those are
it's
circumscribed
helpful in Honduras that the immigration part isn't super hard, right? So in a different country where immigration would otherwise be super hard, or it's like a very difficult to get the people you want in, that would be much more important than it is here. Here, we can kind of live with it.
And defense, I can totally see how you absolutely don't want that.
Exactly.
But why crime? Why not crime?
So the interesting is the criminal code and then the enforcement of the criminal code, right? So we can still do the enforcement of the criminal code, right? So in practice, the criminal law is, is not making a couple of things possible that we'd like to do, like for example, like psychedelics. Maybe there's a more efficient way to think about like prison and things like that. But you don't want to innovate too much. So it is in practice not the biggest bottleneck because it's not that the Honduran police, actually, can you talk a bit about that, how it is when there's like a crime that happens here?
Yeah, so we have in the ZA law, the ZA itself, the municipality can deputize security, either public or private. By public here, I mean like the Prospera ZA, the political entity could hire them, or they subcontract that out to private firms to do the same thing, and then they're deputized to be able to basically respond to incidents, things like that. But then what happens is, like say I rob Niklas right now, and he calls our security force. What they're going to do is arrest me and then gather the evidence and hand me over to the national police. And the national police will take it from there to prosecute me or not.
So you don't have tribunals. You have police, but local police, but not tribunals.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the rest includes things like what is the most valuable? Again, you'd kind of work backwards from what's your growth industry actually. What attracted me so much about Honduras is just this wide open space, right? So if you come to Honduras and do a ZA or a zone, then you can make different kind of choices what to optimize for. Right, so you can say you do something that's really great for biomedical or for finance or for agriculture. Right, there's a third ZA actually, which is optimized for agriculture in interesting and important ways.
Third ZA where? Sorry.
Yeah, it's called Orquídea. Right, somewhere in the south. There's not too much that's known about it. They're deliberately quiet. Also, their founder passed away recently. So I don't know what the status of it is, but from what I've been hearing is that they've been commercially super successful actually. They have several thousands of people that are employed in it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what attracted me so much about the Honduran framework. And then what's so interesting about Prospera is that they have sort of the most full stack framework. Sort of really thinking from how can we really maximize the possibility space within the ZA framework, right? Very ambitious, right? So a rule of law, but I think it's very well designed and it's ministered. So you have an Estonia-style e-governance platform. The laws are all very transparent. And then the core idea of like regulatory flexibility is what I found so interesting.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about this, before we dive into the details of that, just a note there. This is a double-edged sword too, which we did not anticipate at first. I'll just speak for myself here, not for the rest of the company. I certainly didn't. I went into this thinking about the growth, right? So we'll go back to the history a little bit, right? Honduras had the framework. Some of the framers of the law reached out to our founder CEO, Eric. They met, discussed it, and then, the partnership kind of developed from there. And we got the jurisdiction, the actual ZA jurisdiction approved in 2017. Now from there, we spent several years building this robust, as Niklas says, like full stack legal governance and regulatory institutions with the goal of enabling anyone in any industry to do things better, faster, more efficiently, more cheaply here, while still preserving, like I said, the public health and public good in a variety of ways, right? Being reasonable about these things. And so we spent years doing that with international experts from around the world, very deeply studying, the development of, Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, the United States even, of like what are the best things we can borrow that we just know work elsewhere. Like trying to invent as little as possible, but just take what we know works around the world and combine it into like the best framework for doing business, living, and working of anywhere in the world. Now, when I say this robustness is a double-edged sword, it's in the following way. I, at least, naively, in retrospect, was thinking, oh, well, it's the best place in the world to do business. People will come. Like, of course, businesses will come, right? Yeah, sure, we'll reach out to them. I'm not saying they're just going to show up. Like, we have to tell them we exist. But assuming we do that, everybody's going to be, knocking down the door to do so. Was not the case at all. And for a very simple reason that as soon as I say it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Entrepreneurs are not public policy experts. So when I tell you, right, I tell someone who's an entrepreneur, hey, we're the best place in the world to do business. That doesn't mean literally anything. So then you either have to, A, try to explain to them these public policy advantages, which is like a whole rabbit hole in and of itself, or just hope they already know about it. And because they also are an entrepreneur that happens to understand public policy deeply, understand at an intuitive level the advantages, and therefore are willing and able to move there. So this is where Niklas has been massively important. Because before Niklas came, we were reaching out to a variety of industries. We had done, a competitive analysis of like what companies would gain the most from being here, what industries, et cetera. We're, reaching out to a bunch of them, still operating under this kind of, for me at least, from my perspective, if we build it, they will come type approach. That was not the case. So Niklas came and joined and started building Infinita so that focused on, effectively, a particular industry that is one of the ones we had identified, like, will for sure benefit a lot.
So what was the short list?
Biotech, and initially we had thought finance, Because the kind of rule of thumb here is like, all right, what are the most overly regulated?
Yeah.
Exactly, which is like medical and finance, effectively.
Okay.
Medical is a clear slam dunk, which is why Niklas ended up focusing on that. Finance looks like a slam dunk until you start digging into it. And effectively, in order to partake in the international global financial system, a lot of these legal and regulatory,
to do
they're
US
just baked
anyways.
in.
Yeah.
Correct. They're just non-negotiable. Like, sure, you can do whatever you want in a little, shell.
Unless you do crypto.
Correct. Unless you do crypto. That's exactly right. But even there, right, the crypto people, by their very nature, are, very international. They can move around.
You cannot keep them.
Yeah, exactly. So that, again, was another one of those. And we have some crypto companies here.
Yeah,
So
Bitcoin when it's pretty big here. Yeah.
Exactly. But it turned out, that was not actually as, promising, efficacious as we had perhaps hoped. So biotech ended up being the thing that both benefits the most and then gave us something to specifically target, right? Because just going to the business world and saying we're the best place to do business is much less compelling and very different from going to, and again, Niklas was the one who started doing this, going to biotech firms and saying, you can do your clinical or your early stage experimentation here, like that you just literally can't do anywhere else in a safe way, obviously. There are safety standards and stuff, but you just do it faster. Your clinical trials cost 1,000 times less or 100 times less here than they would otherwise. Niklas was the one that realized that and then was like, oh, well, we should just build the biotech industry here specifically as the niche, the initial like ideal customer target. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit some.
It's Act 2. Act 2 enters new character,
That's exactly
Niklas Anzinger.
Yeah. I mean, Trey set it up very nicely. And I was actually actively doing the customer research for it. So I also wasn't decided. And so
What do you mean you were doing the customer research for it?
So I was doing different conferences in these different industries. Right. All right. Let's see what I actually try to invite a couple of entrepreneurs from these different industries. I wasn't
Hold on, because like here, that's assuming you're already in Prospera and you want to have
4 years
Prospera.
ago, I arrived here, and there we were in the situation that we had these kind of, we thought, okay, healthcare, biotech, finance.
Not to interrupt you. I think what he's asking is, how did you end up here? Like,
Correct.
the
Okay,
actual
sure,
history
sure,
of how you
sure.
got here.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I basically read Scott Alexander's article, Perspectives on Prospera, which was very influential. So
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, to the influence that
Look what you did.
bloggers and independent media have.
That's exactly right. And by the way, a brief aside on this before Niklas continues. This is just a funny. So I have done a lot of our like media stuff. We have like media training I've been through and whatever. I try to do some of our media interviews. And I'm not exaggerating. We've had the New York Times, we've had Bloomberg, Financial Times, like a bunch of mainstream outlets, write stuff about us. And when I tell you Scott asked the most intense, detailed, insightful questions that made me think like, crap, I don't even know if I've thought about that. Really? Let me think about it. I think my response to him ended up being something like 50 pages.
Wow.
40 pages. So it was a wild level of detail.
Trey was the one who got me here indirectly by helping Scott or giving Scott.
Sorry, because Scott came here, right?
No,
he has not been here. The way this started,
He has not been here.
The way this started is
I
the
invited
most.
him many times.
way.
I invited him many times.
I've spent time with Scott like in person. Yeah, he just doesn't travel much at all. He just doesn't like traveling, at least internationally for sure.
Mind blown.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the way this whole thing started, talk about butterfly effect. He had made up. I've followed him for years. I just love his blog.
Yeah,
he had
it's amazing.
made an aside in one of his like links things that he does once a month about Prospera, and it was wrong. So I commented and was like, "Hey, just say I work at Prospera. Just FYI, this part's wrong. Here's a link to the correct like citation. It was like one of our legal things. And I was like, here's the link to the law. You can go read it and look at. But that was wrong. Here's the correct source. Well, then he immediately replied and was like, "Oh, this is interesting. I have some other questions because I'm considering writing about this, exploring it more." So I gave him my email address, and then I get this list of questions that, like I said, is the most intense questions I've gotten about this. And he and I went back and forth for a while, and then he published it.
Wow. Okay. So you read this?
Yeah. So I read this. I was a digital nomad at the time. I was like,
they were already packed.
looking forward to the most ambitious business I could build, and I was frustrated with the challenges in these different industries. And I was realizing I had a background in economics and philosophy and public choice. And when the pandemic started, I was looking especially for healthcare. Hey, maybe that's an area where I can use my skill set. Well, I did analytics before, like data collection and management and all of that. So I developed kind of some adjacent interest, especially in pharma and in healthcare, because it's just so high impact, right? This is where data can have to make the most difference to you. Yeah. That was really the only reason. So I just spent a couple of months researching different business models in healthcare and what's kind of missing or lacking. And sort of how do all these institutions actually work, right? And the pandemic was kind of stress testing a lot of these institutions. But my conclusion was ultimately, well, the science and technology is several decades ahead. The problem is actually the regulations and the institutions and the way we do things, not only at the FDA level. The FDA is only the boogeyman very often, but actually compared to many other institutions, it's actually quite reasonable, right? So there's also IRBs, and there is, the same or equivalent health regulators in other countries and things like that. So, okay, I can solve this. And I actually had a background in public policy, like not to the level of where I was passing legislation, more like being in think tanks and writing papers that nobody read in the end. So intellectually, I was always gravitating towards these things because I think they are the big levers of the things that make the biggest, change in the world. But the process for changing them, like through DC, public policy and all of that, I just saw, okay, that doesn't work. And then afterwards, I spent 5 years in a startup, like that startup where we basically did survey research in more than 100 countries, right? So I can give you, I can still write extremely good surveys if you're ever interested in that. Just looking for, so I was started very early, similar to Trey, sort of as an intern back then, and left as kind of the, right hand to the CEO, VP of growth and all of that. And then I decided, okay, I learned the skill set now to be my own founder. Yeah. What is it that I want to do? And around the same time, I met my wife. We became digital nomads. Due to the pandemic, we went traveling. At the time, I was in Mexico, and that's when I just got a lot into Scott Alexander, rationalism, all of that. Actually, funnily, I've met Scott Alexander in person at a meetup in Lisbon. It's just like a bit of a year before. I actually didn't know he would show up.
He does travel.
He does travel. Yeah, he does travel.
Quite
but rarely. He has these very
just not to Prospera.
Yeah. No, he has these very planned, very intense trips.
Okay.
So he went to Lisbon.
Okay.
So I got into the scene, and then that article fell into my lap for some reason, and I was like, let's check this out. And that was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I was not yet thinking about doing a business there. That was still far off from me. I'd worked on something else, like a more reasonable B2B SaaS kind of thing that seemed feasible, which is in hindsight a mistake. You shouldn't work on what's feasible. You should actually go after sort of the most ambitious version of what you're trying to do in the world, and not sort of do a startup first that gives you an access to do other things, I think. Then I came here, and it was just the things coming together for me, sort of the policy angle and the tech angle. So maybe we can use the tech and the startup approach here to apply it to the biggest problem in the world that's causing all these other problems, right? So governance and how it is broken is causing the problems in healthcare and biotech, is causing the problems in housing, is causing the problems in energy and finance and to all these industries, right? So if we can make that base layer work, then we can make everything else work. That was my key insight. And I started, that was like, okay, it is coming together now, what I've been always looking for, and what's the most ambitious possible thing I could do with my life is making that work. And I was learning all of that about the legal system. All these things are very new to me, how the common law worked and all of that. And then I was like, okay, but the main thing that was missing, as Trey said, is we don't have that growth industry, or we don't have that growth thesis. There is no product market fit yet. There is not a clearly identifiable demand. It's sort of this broad full stack, but it's not specific enough, right? So we need to really find an industry or a customer profile that benefits so much from this in the early days that they tolerate some of the things missing. So that's a very typical journey in technology. Almost any technology in the beginning is inferior to the existing technology almost anyway.
But very good in one specific area that really matters to customers.
Exactly. Yep. And it kind of grows around that. Yep. And that's what I took as my mission to find, right? So first I did a VC fund basically to invest in different industries or startups and exposing them to this, right? And, I look, and I can go into this, I had conferences on education, on crypto, on finance stuff, but it was pretty clear pretty early on that health and biotech was really the one that would benefit the most. But still, I didn't have access to it's still a massive industry. Yeah. Right. It's not that you can just make an outright. And then what actually happened was Vitalik's Zuzalu pop-up city.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, and this is where a very specific niche of sort of the crypto adjacent longevity biotech people came together. And Zuzalu itself kind of grew out of the think space of like network states and biology.
It's funny because I never realized this connection. It's like whenever you talk about these network states, there's the crypto people and there's the longevity people. It's like why these two like people? Okay, these are just the most regulated industries.
These are the most regulated industries, and we're kind of on the fringe trying to figure something out. But yeah, it was a pretty direct response of Vitalik to Biology's article about network states. Right?
Article, book.
Was it the book already? Maybe it was the book.
He did an
around
article
the time.
form first.
Yeah,
I'm
he did
pretty
several
sure.
articles and several drafts of the book. Yeah. And Zuzalu was basically, okay, let's try this out because we have this highly online community. Okay. Let's put it together. And
so you
see
were in Zuzalu?
I was in Zuzalu.
Okay.
And I had the experience, I was in Prospera for 2 years. And for them, for Zuzalu, much of this was really sort of a very online, okay, are we doing like a new Discord server or whatever?
Yeah.
They called themselves network states. That was the time back then. And Biology knew much more than that, but I think he wasn't yet able to articulate or give something concrete as to what it is, right? But I had that experience from Prospera, so I actually did a lot of workshops and talks and developed a thesis around and sort of I refined my vocabulary and like how and which specific businesses could help. And I could meet several of these businesses, like the longevity, the crypto businesses, all of that. And the crypto businesses. And my insight basically was, and besides, I think I really established Prospera's brand there through Zuzalu, and sort of the very concrete, how can you, go through all these legal steps and hoops to establish in new jurisdictions. And what I found for myself is, the crypto stuff, great. So there is some specific ones that can really fit, and on the finance side. But overall, it's like right now a huge infrastructure challenge. And jurisdiction is not that it's solved, but the really difficult part with jurisdiction is not how flexible it actually is and the technical flexibility, but also the credibility, right? So crypto uses Swiss foundations, for example, right? So Swiss foundations that hold like the token entity and things like that. So it's very hard to compete with that.
So sorry, what like tell me more. What does it matter?
So how are you competitive? How do you attract the crypto industry, right? Is it because of the physical place? Not really, right? I mean, you have loads of other options. I mean, this is very attractive here, to be honest. But is it the thing that gives you a business advantage? Not really, right? So what can give you a business advantage if you're in finance or in crypto? Is that the rules are better. And in what ways could the rules be better? KYC, okay, forget it. It's under FATF, right? So that's international regulations. You can't get around it. Tokenization, okay, interesting. So it's much more easy to tokenize a Prospera entity. Like the requirements to do it and how you need to report it is just much lower to non-existent. So, okay, that's interesting. So you have a huge advantage doing a tokenized company in Prospera while it's registered, which is internationally accepted. Same with real estate. You can put it on chain and things like that. You can pay things in crypto, and which makes like the transaction in the end easier when you like finance real estate. Okay, these are really great advantages, and I think there's still very interesting businesses you can build with it. Now the problem is, like, how do you scale? Right, you need credibility. So the banks that got started here, they rely on correspondent banks from elsewhere. Like our vision here is not like autarky, we have everything contained here. You need to build, and if you want to build startups, you need to build businesses that can transact with the rest of the world. Yeah. So it is a good or interesting starting point, but what you need most to scale to other jurisdictions is credibility, right? So that means for any of these crypto businesses, any of these businesses need to go out on their own to establish credibility for their specific business idea.
Okay.
Right? So that means there is several hundreds of potential companies that could be great companies, but each of these companies is on their own, right? And need to charter a new pathway. Versus in biotech, especially in longevity biotech, which faced very stronger overregulation than other biotech. Okay, if we develop one playbook, we can send hundreds of companies through it. Right?
Why?
So
why the difference?
Because the difference is the way things are done right now is through this clinical trial system. You do things in a certain way. It's basically a playbook. And we could do the same thing, right? So there were ideas out like phase one only, for example. So you still do the same things and you can add access to a market. You can get cheaper data and things like that. So that is one playbook that hundreds of biotech companies can follow. Get more data here more cheaply, get paying customers here earlier, and do phase 1 trials.
And to contrast this with the crypto example that Niklas was referring to, right?
Yeah.
Just to drive the point home a little more. Let's say you're a crypto firm, you're trying to do real world asset or RWA tokenization here, right? You can totally do that, like the legal flexibility and the
What tokenization?
real world asset. Just means like tokenizing on chain, a property or rare, collectible stuff like that. So you could totally do that here much more easily and flexibly and rapidly, but you're basically inventing an entirely new industry. Right? There's no playbook for how this works. There's no like existing companies that you can plug into. Like, I'll just use their existing RWA.
To the point,
framework.
like
But with
entrepreneurs
biotech, you
aren't.
can.
Yeah. To the point, entrepreneurs aren't policy experts, right? So in crypto, many entrepreneurs are forced to become kind of legal experts. But again, everyone's on their own. Versus biotech, okay, we have the back end solved and the front end is here. Okay, you can go to this connect, do trials, and you have these potential customers to come. So that's why, I think that's why we took the bet.
Okay, so let me make sure that I'm understanding correctly. So you have these two industries. You have finance and healthcare. These are the most highly regulated. On finance, you have the problem that it's very much a global network. You're forced to tap into this anyway, and so you have to just abide by the rules that they use. If you want to create something alternative, it has to be completely alternative, which means that it's so much harder to build something that really grows, which we've seen, right? And in crypto, you have Bitcoin that's been very successful. Now we have stable coins, but there's so many things that are really, really hard to grow. What I'm hearing you say is that that's not really at all the way it works in biotech. You have a couple of things that are different. One of them is like there's a rules that everybody kind of follows, so it's easier to kind of look at these rules and just hack.
The process is the same. I mean, you need to figure out to bring a new drug to market. You need to know whether it's safe and whether it works.
And there's no network effects there, where you can just take one drug, you figure it out, and then you can sell it everywhere. So you don't have these issues. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so you reached this conclusion in Zuzalu, you said?
Partly, yeah. That
Why?
was a big step. Because I found some companies and some people that were actually willing to do it, right? So,
As in entrepreneurs in biotech who were willing to move to Prospera?
We've already looked at options such as Bahamas, such as Australia. Hey, why not even like sea stats on the ocean? Like longevity biotech as a whole was much more open-minded to these things, because that's even more regulated than regular biotech.
I see.
And that is because longevity is not considered a disease.
Yes.
Aging is not considered a disease.
Oh, so within So within healthcare, the subset of longevity is even more interesting because
there's
it's
already a realization, hey, the regular system doesn't work for us.
So by the way, just a small note here, because I'm having my mind partially blown because to me, any revolution needs to come from big, strong values, right? We want to achieve this, and we cannot do it. And so, what I'm hearing you say is the world is going in a very great direction across all directions, except there's one. There's just too many rules. So you have these freedom kind of movement of we need more rules, more like change. And what does it mean? And it turns out that that movement will, by nature, push first two aspects. The most regulated ones happen to be finance and happen to be healthcare. And then within healthcare, the most problematic happens to be longevity. So then you have, because of the world, the nature of the world, a connection that happens between I want to be the most free and I want to live the longest, which happen to be two very strong values. So I think that's beautiful.
So proving the thing wrong that there's only two things that are unavoidable in life. That's
right.
taxes.
Right? Both of them. Okay. So longevity, like biotech, and within that longevity. So keep going.
Yeah. So that was the inside, and that's what the inside around which I built Infinita, the company, right? So Zuzalu happened, and that was the beginning of more experiments like that, and we did the first Vitalia pop-up city in Prospera as a result of that, right? So a longevity focused pop-up city that was like the beginning of Infinita, the company, and building sort of a longevity district or building sort of a multi-jurisdictional network of different hubs. So similar to Prospera, building sort of the full governance stack and building special economic zones in different places, we want to build a more horizontal layer just for medical.
So hold on, actually, so that makes sense to me. I'm actually you're pushing me to go back to the longevity thing, and this one thing that I want to clarify, which is right now it's not a disease, so it's kind of not regulated.
No, it's quite the other way around.
Okay.
Because it's not a disease, but you're still developing things that are classified legally as pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical interventions, there's no regulatory pathway at all.
Why can you not just say it's a supplement?
That's what, so supplements, you can't develop things that would be classified as pharmaceuticals, and the efficacy of the interventions, the things you'd like to do that are, like small molecule drug development, things like that, those are regulated specifically as pharmaceuticals, not as supplements. And the supplement world, basically, there's just a limit. There's a cap on efficacy. You can only kind of create things that are so efficacious before you get into the realm of what is considered a pharmaceutical or a medical therapy of some sort. And then you run into the full legal and regulatory wall, which, to be clear, is not just it's hard. There is not a pathway at all.
Yeah, I mean, what the goal is of the radical life extension community is radical, as the name says, right? So not just to make you live to 120, but push it further to 150, 200, and even further, right? So the thesis is that aging is the underlying causal factor of diseases. So by sort of slowing or halting aging, you prevent all these other diseases that are coming. So scientifically speaking, or just purely from the physics, there is very widespread consensus among some of the top scientists in the world that physically it's not impossible to completely stop aging, right? You don't age from now on. There's actually a discussion whether you can reverse aging or not. So Aubrey de Grey and Peter Fedichev, two giants in the field,
factors
are on different sides of that debate. So Fedichev says you can't reverse aging, and Aubrey de Grey says you potentially can, right? So this is super ambitious. That means you need to have very powerful interventions, very powerful treatments or drugs. So there is absolutely no way it's not regulated by the existing regulations on these kinds of things.
Okay, so now I understand longevity and the connection there. And so you from Zuzalu and like thinking afterwards, you come back and you say, okay, like I want to focus more on the biotech side. And within that longevity, what happens there?
Yeah, so we did the first pop-up city, and it was super successful.
Italia.
And we had, exactly. And we had several companies come out of that. One of the big success cases is Unlimited Bio, right? So they started a company here in Prospera, and they're very clever how they went about it. They're not necessarily doing completely new science. They're just repurposing existing drugs for different indications, which is a very big, obvious gap in the existing medical system. And here you can get it into human faster and see if a drug works for different indications than what it's approved for.
And so if I understand correctly, the reason why this is valuable is because you don't need to do phase 1 because it's already right, it's already proven to be safe. And you also, it's not like you don't even need to be FDA approved because like doctors can also already prescribe it. It's just a matter of proving efficacy for something else.
Actually, there's a nuance there, which is really important. Even if you have, this is what a lot of what Unlimited Bio does, even if you have a treatment, a therapy, a pharmaceutical, a drug, whatever, that does work for an anti-aging purpose or for an existing disease indication, but it was approved in Australia, the EU, wherever, you still have to do the entire multi-billion-dollar, decade-long process in the U.S. to recertify the whole thing. So it's not even just that doctors could prescribe it off-label. A lot of these, they can't even do that because the drug itself, even though it's been proven safe and efficacious elsewhere in other developed places, you still just can't use it in the U.S. or in any other jurisdiction. Most of these have no like regulatory reciprocity at all. So Unlimited Bio's whole business model is possible because Prospera has default regulatory reciprocity.
Yeah. And it's actually a very interesting rabbit hole, right? So the indication is the key word here, right? So the indication means the FDA says, here's a list of diseases, it's called indications, say Alzheimer's or
Parkinson's.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a long list of diseases. And what we mean by approval is that we prove that drug or that treatment works towards treating one of these indications. Right, so you need to show positive, like safety when you use it, and then positive efficacy to reducing that indication, right? So you reduce the rate of Alzheimer or the cancer gets in remission, right? So it's very clearly defined. There's basically a laundry list of these things. So every entrepreneur needs to go out there and, hey, I have an idea for how to do things differently, and they need to select an indication. That's what all the studies, the phase
How
one.
do you define an indication again?
There's just a list of them.
This is a list. It's just a list.
What,
It's
what
open.
is a single indication?
A disease state.
A disease state, yeah.
A what?
A disease state.
Disease state.
Something like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. So you imagine like a manual by a medical association. These are all the things like we know. And that's what I meant when I said aging is not considered a disease.
It's not an indication.
Exactly. It's not an indication.
Got it.
Right? Disease, indication, these endpoints is sometimes called. These are kind of the same thing.
Okay, so let me clarify then the what unlimited bio, like why it's so good, right? So they take drugs that are approved somewhere in the world, and then they do efficacy for some other indication.
Yeah.
If they find a new like efficacy for some new indication, how do they make money for something they haven't
use
patented?
the Prospera legal system, and because of that, you as a patient, if you want to
Switch for treatments?
you could fly here and do the treatment. That's exactly right.
So they make money by prescribing drugs that might or might not be, usually will not be approved by the FDA, but are proven safe
We
from
already know
other
they're safe.
jurisdictions and efficacious for a new indication.
Correct. And it's not like the FDA wouldn't theoretically, like a lot of these, if Unlimited Bio had $20 billion, they
they
could
would
just
do it.
go get them approved in the
That's
US.
right, it's just too expensive.
It's also not that it doesn't exist at all. Repurposing is actually a growing industry, right?
Yeah.
So there's a company called EveryCure that is doing that at a large scale. So they're doing they're not necessarily going directly to patients. They're doing kind of trials after phase one is proven and collecting outcome data and things like that. But it's a growing market, right? Simply because there is tons of drugs out there. And that's actually shows very well how the system right now, it's kind of a smoking gun that it's not entirely necessary to at least have all these expensive efficacy trials, right? Because you have a drug and that drug, say, take GLP-1s. GLP-1s were originally approved for diabetes, right, in 2003. And the studies actually go back more than 20 years, right? And then recently it's discovered, it works for something else, right? It works for weight loss as well, right? That's a different indication than diabetes, right? And there is thousands of drugs out there who are approved for something, but they're not. But the company is not allowed to market them
for something else.
for other things they can be used for, even though the companies are the biggest experts on that data.
That's right.
Now, what's interesting is there's a market called off-label prescriptions, right? So doctors are actually allowed to give patients drugs that aren't approved or proven effective for what they. So what that shows is that doctors on their own, instead of a decentralized way, can figure out other uses of these drugs without going through an efficacy trial.
Got it.
Which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because these doctors are actually less qualified than the companies who have all the scientists and research on it. Right?
Interesting. Okay, so then I understand here. Like if we go from the top, back from the top, you want to attract people. To attract people, you supply and demand on the supply side. The most important thing is the jobs. For jobs, you want businesses to be interested in coming here. The ones that are going to be the most interested are the ones who are suffering the biggest pain point in their original countries, which in this case is regulation. Within regulation, the two biggest ones are healthcare and finance. And then we just talked about why healthcare is better. And then within healthcare, a no-brainer thing to do is just, hey, like the drugs that already exist, they're already safe, they're already approved in other countries. Let's just see what else they can be good at. And then we are going to fly people from the US to come here to be treated.
Correct.
Now, what is kind of where we're at right now? I mean, we've been 4 years basically surviving, and that was the most important thing. And now we're in a situation where we'll be much better to get investment, right? Especially because now we can expect friendly relations with the government of Honduras, and that makes something very important possible that wasn't before, right? So the biotech companies that I'm bringing right now, and I brought hundreds, right? And several of them we were able to get funding, right? It is just a story that resonates with them. It gives people some hope and some potential option. But realistically, we can't have that many of them here right now simply because there is no lab, for example. And there is no large hospital. Right now there's one clinic, right? So
Why not?
Why is it not there?
Yeah.
Well, because it hasn't been built yet.
Yeah, and so to this point, and this ties it neatly into back where we all started of like the things you need. The jurisdiction part being super important, right? Well, over the last 4 years, with a hostile Honduran governmental administration,
Okay, hold on, because some people in my audience definitely will not know about this.
Fair point.
Right? So 2021, our friend Xiomara gets elected as president of Honduras, and then all the people who had been figuring out the SEZs get out of the government, and then what happens?
Yes. So they basically used the ZEs as a kind of a political target, a political football to try to get a win. They attempted to repeal the enabling legislation as well as the constitutional amendment. So let me back up a little bit.
Why do they use this as a punching ball?
Oh, because they're communists. They just unironically, because they're not just targeting us. I'm not even saying that tongue in cheek, like they literally are. And they didn't just target us. They targeted every free market oriented thing in the country.
The private sector itself.
The private sector just as a concept, literally the private sector they were against. We are, if nothing else, emblematic.
You represent freedom, and they are against freedom.
Yes, that is exactly right.
So it's more the freedom than the sovereignty.
They used the sovereignty as an argument, but it was much more the underlying ideological push. The sovereignty is how you sell it and why you say that you have justification for this.
Interesting. Okay.
The underlying political ideology is just they fought Honduran companies that are in the private sector. It wasn't just us and other investors. It was Honduran national companies too.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So because of that, obviously, a bit harder to operate. So they did repeal what's called the ZE Organic Law. A bit of legal arcana here to give context, right? The ZE law framers were geniuses, and one of the things they knew was that we need to give this framework the maximum level of legal stability because at some point in the near or medium term future, ended up being near future, a hostile administration is going to come in, and we need to make sure that this is resilient so that investors looking to invest in things like large scale infrastructure that need decades to amortize can trust that their investment will be protected, right? Yeah. So one of the things that they baked in here, among other things, there's some international treaties that in the net legal effect, without boring you with legal arcana, the net legal effect of these international treaties is that Honduras cannot unilaterally abrogate the agreements they've made with companies to do these type of things.
Because if they do that, what happens?
They're in violation of international treaties, which means they can be the countries with which they've made these agreements could do a variety of things that are justified under international law at that point. And then importantly for us, the companies themselves, but importantly for us, the companies themselves can then sue them in international court for violating the agreement because they violated an international treaty.
And if they say, I don't care, what happens?
They tried to, but they had already signed a treaty to be part of this investor-state dispute court at the World Bank. Yeah. So you have full standing to sue them there.
Got it.
But then what happens when you get awarded, say, I don't know, 1 billion or 5 billion? And how does that money get collected?
Yeah, so this is, again, legal arcana.
This is actually very important, I think, for the readers and your readers of your blog on the areas of sovereignty, right? Because if we hadn't done this, I would know nothing about investor-state arbitration, right? So imagine you go to a country and you invest a lot and you do a lot, and then the government changes and screw everything the previous government said. We'll just take your stuff. Can they... Can you sue them for that?
Yeah.
Turns out you can.
Turns out you can. That's exactly right.
And so hold on, but just to push the next step there. So you say, okay, you can go on arbitration in the World Bank, and so you go there and you win, and then what happens?
Sure. So just in general, I'm not speaking to our specific case because obviously we're in ongoing litigation, so I can't talk about that. But just in general as a concept, what happens is company A sues country B. Okay, you win the arbitration at the World Bank. Well, then the company, the World Bank, and then the country that company might have been from or domiciled in, say it's the United States because global hegemon. Yeah. Then that country now has the right, with this kind of sign off from the World Bank, to go reclaim that money that they are now owed as a result of the award from the suit. And that can happen in a variety of ways, whether you're seizing foreign currency reserves, assets. A great, silly example of this was when the United States a couple of years ago seized Maduro's private plane before they just seized the man. That's why they can do that kind of stuff.
So what I'm hearing you say...
It's actually quite effective, right? So if you look at a bunch of cases, so big cases where Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, a bunch of countries like that, so they have been granted, so the companies have been granted awards in the tens of billions, some of them. And the amount that's typically collected, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while.
It takes years.
Yeah, but it collects between 20 and 80% of that award typically.
Okay.
Right?
Depending on the country and the award. That's exactly right.
I see. Okay.
It takes a long time, but it happens eventually. That's
got it.
So yeah, it's the interesting thing is that's possible, right? Because again, there's supranational institutions, and it's the question like, what is sovereignty,
Got it.
right? If you like,
And so the previous administration had all these protections, which meant really that if the new government, the new administration stopped Prospera, they would be liable for a lot of money.
Correct.
And so they were aggressive in their speech and hostile to Prospera, but they didn't shut you down.
Correct. And they could have, like to be super clear, I've said this before, but they could have said a singular, like one military policeman over here says, hey, the government says, we're not going to, we're a private company. Like we're not, that's an international foreign policy implication for the US. We're going to leave. That's fine. They just never did that because they knew they had this losing case. And the second they do that, they basically expedite that case complete because now it's genuinely open and shut. Like the case takes a year or two instead of 5 or 6 years.
Oh, okay.
It's much faster. So that's part of the reason, just the kind of real politic of why they didn't do that. They just insta-lose the arbitration.
Interesting.
Yes. So they did repeal what's called the Zete Organic Law. So the Zete structure is basically a constitutional amendment and then an organic law. The constitutional amendment creates the framework to do this. It explicitly authorizes the country to do this, to create these zones. And the organic law was the arcana, the details of like, here's how you create a zone. Right? Here's the ministerial process. Here's the committee.
For the creation.
Yes. Here's the committee that you have to apply to these sorts of things. You just hit a nail on the head there for the creation. So what that means, like the real fact of the matter right now is you could not create a new Zete at the moment, but existing Zetes, because they already exist, and the constitutional amendment was not repealed because that requires a supermajority vote of Congress in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, which the prior administration was unable to secure. The constitutional amendments remain, along with our acquired rights and other companies' acquired rights from a variety of treaties and contracts, et cetera. And so as a result of that, they cannot shut you down. And if they try to, well, then you just instantly win the arbitration, basically.
Got it.
Instantly is in legal terms is a couple years.
So guys, so that's why you guys survived. And then now you survived. There's a new administration. What's the relationship with the new administration?
Good. We can't get into the details here for obvious reasons, but they've publicly said that they're quite excited to work with the commercial sector again, restore normal operations there. And we are optimistic in general that we will be able to settle the whole thing and continue working together for the prosperity of Hondurans moving forward.
That's awesome. And so so now we're back to business. For 4 years, you were like talking with all these bio companies and like, oh yeah, I'm interested, but I don't want my investments to be shut down and I don't want to go to jail. And I assume also you guys didn't want to build labs.
Well, there's a second order effect there. We totally would have, actually. The second order effect, so this is the whole point of me saying any of this. There's a second order effect here that you often would not think about unless you're experiencing it, which we did. Let's say you want to build a lab, which obviously we do, in a big clinic, like a big lab clinic with a bunch of state-of-the-art equipment. That costs money. Let's say it costs, I'm making up a number. Actually, Niklas would know the exact cost. I'm going to make up a number. So let's say it's $10 million. If it's $10 million, where are you going to get that money? Well, you're going to raise equity capital for that. Well, they're going to Google what's going on. And say, why would I give you money that is about to go straight to the Honduran government? From their point of view, right? It's just going to get seized. So then you say, all right, well, let me go try to get traditional financing for this. So, debt construction financing or something, or maybe some private equity, something from the traditional finance world. Well, you're going to fail step 1 of due diligence before due diligence even starts. Because one of the first things you do in due diligence is assess legal risk, which is obviously clearly high for this. So you can't get the financing to build the thing. Had someone come along and said, hey, here's $10 million, this would be built right now.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why we couldn't really do the infrastructure build up then. Hopefully we can do it now.
But now you have investors lining up to give you checks.
The settlement is not yet through. I hope when that happens. But it's actually, for me, there's basically 2 problems here, right? So one is the infrastructure problem and the other is the market size, right? So it's still a small market. So it's great that we have regulatory reciprocity here, but then how do we get regulatory reciprocity elsewhere is the question.
I missed that.
So imagine you develop a drug here and you have a bunch of customers here. Maybe you can get a couple of hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand patients. If you have like a rare disease or something like that, under medical reciprocity and under very strong and strict informed consent, you can do it here. Right, so it can be a haven for that. But it's a small place, right? So it will take a while before we have like top grade hospitals and clinics. So the companies kind of want to know, right, what do I do after I do this? How do I get to a big market? How do I get a big exit? Right? So to do that, they need access to large markets. Like the FDA is obviously sort of the big price if they get that. Some of them, they're going to Australia and some other jurisdictions. Great. The FDA is the big prize. So the question for us is like, okay, what is step in the playbook that we do here? What is step 2? Right. So that's why I'm right now focusing on United States, actually, and on right to try laws through Montana and New Hampshire, for example.
Okay, so hold on, because we've touched on all of this before, but now but this is new mental framework. So let's go through this. I understand why Unlimited Bio came here. That makes sense. What is the legislative landscape or regulatory landscape in healthcare in the United States that allows you to do many things here? And then, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're also saying, I want the business of medical tourism, but you're saying phase 2 is beyond medical tourism. So am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the medical tourism is fine, and we could build a decent business around that, but I think it's not as scalable as the alternative that I'm pursuing right now, right? Because after all, we're still an offshore destination, right? An offshore destination doesn't come with the most credibility, right? So what I'm trying to do basically is to establish that credibility through having an entity and have a pathway for the biotechs in the United States, right? And then we can funnel more of that credibility and capital also here to do more of that infrastructure. So it's basically a sequencing choice. So my goal is that we have multiple jurisdictions or hubs that accepts our playbook, our regulatory model, right? So we're kind of an alternative FDA. So you need to only do a phase 1, and then, our experts still need to look at it, but then you're approved in these jurisdictions that we're working with.
In the United States, critically, it's the largest healthcare market.
So let's take the example of Wyoming. How would this work exactly?
Montana.
So, thank you. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
They're close enough.
So, I mean, the US legal system has many interesting features, right? So these kinds of problems that we're dealing with are not completely new. There have been legal changes before that make certain things possible. So for example, the Orphan Drug Act in the United States. Okay. Like the Orphan Drug Act made it faster for drugs that don't have too many patients, more than like several tens of thousands, to not have the same hurdles as others, right? Because there are some diseases that only affect a small number of people. So it's very hard for these drugs to spend like billions on them if there's not that many customers, right? So this is one example. And there's many sort of legal changes that happen over time in the United States. Like, although I think many things have been getting worse, but if you zoom into specific industries, especially digital and software and AI, it's actually much easier than before to be an entrepreneur. And that's because of some specific legal, anyway, going too far. But the point is, the United States has a very strict system. You need FDA approval to bring a new drug to market, but it's actually very specific how that legal architecture works. Mm-hmm. Like the US Constitution does not have an FDA. Mm-hmm. It does not say anywhere that the US government can regulate healthcare, right? So it's actually a construction through the Interstate Commerce Clause, right? So not sure how deep you want to go into that.
So,
but
what I wanted to understand is I understand why we're in the space of biotech and longevity.
Let me make it simpler. So we're working with what's called right to try legislation. So the idea behind right to try is very simple.
You're dying anyways.
Exactly. Why shouldn't you be able to access treatments? Yeah. There's a federal right to try act even, and more than 40 states have right to try acts. Now the problem with it is hardly used. Right. And we just took a look at it. It's okay. Why is it not used? And the conclusion we came up with is that the companies have too high perceived downsides and too little upside. Right. So the downside, if they give a patient a drug under right to try,
they have to use the data. They still have to use the data. Right. No, tell me.
The FDA could say, hey, something happened, so I'm going to use that against you in the trial.
Yeah. So they can use the data.
It's actually a bit of an overblown fear. Like the FDA is actually quite permissive with many of the state level access regimes, even though they could be considered federally illegal. But even more importantly, you can only charge at most at cost to the patient, right? So that means you can't make a profit this way, which means you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart. And the average biotech founder is highly is doing this because they want to save people's lives.
But it's very expensive.
But it's difficult, especially the bigger you get and the more is on the line in your drug pipeline to take that kind of risk. So right to try is effectively not used, but the moral idea behind it is established. Now, Montana removed a few of those barriers to basically to make it easier for people to access. And we thought they made like one very important step, which is basically saying, okay, you can even do it if you're not terminally ill. In fact, everyone can do it. Right? It's quite significant, right? So you could go all the way with like, you can be all Brian Johnson and do health optimization, which is great. I'm all for that. I'm not going there with my business yet because that's not what establishes credibility. But right now, you basically need to prove that you're dying in 6 months.
Yes.
Which is very stressful and getting like the stamps from the doctors or whatever.
I see.
And that means there's a lot of gaps. So for example, there is post-cancer treatments that reduce your rate of remission. These wouldn't fall under right to try, right? And there's also chronic pain, for example. That's also not covered by right to try. And also the whole longevity, and going back to that premise is, right, we want to prevent you from becoming terminally ill, right? So the original Montana law that made any patient eligible was actually driven by the longevity industry because they were saying, all right, now we don't have that problem where we are forced into this disease terminal illness paradigm. Now we can develop treatments and look whether it improves surrogate endpoints and biomarkers, and this way prove that it extends people's lifespan. That was the original Montana law. And then in the recent iteration, we were thinking, okay, how can we develop a business model that gets the companies we're working with to market in Montana? And that's what the recent law is based on. So we're basically removing risk factors and we're increasing, or we're adding factors that can create upside. So for example, in Montana, you can charge for profit. Just like that.
Got it. So that makes sense. And so there's a few of these user needs that are uncovered, basically, what I'm hearing, right? So the first one we mentioned is, I want to use this drug for an off-label indication. I cannot. Another one is, I'm dying. I want to use this drug that's being tested. I cannot. What are like 3 or 4 of these other like end user use cases that you guys are targeting? I
mean, generally oncology, neurodegenerative. Like the thing is, even the process of proving you're terminally ill is already a step, right? Now I can be very concrete. Actually, what we're interested in, now that we kind of have a blank slate in that case, because we're working with a hospital that actually told us, here are the 4 things we're interested in. It's one of the largest hospitals in the state, which is oncology, cancer, right? So we had Sidney Branji here recently, who went founder mode on his cancer. So that's very relevant. And then neurodegenerative disease, heart disease, and they actually like the idea of healthy aging. That's what they call longevity.
Who is they?
The hospital that we're working with.
Okay.
Right. So they want to actually build a healthy aging center there. Right. So
where, sorry?
The hospital in Montana. Yeah. Okay. So that's ideal for us. So the interesting part is, under this legislation, we're creating kind of a new category that Alex Tabarrok, a very well-known GMU economist, calls a private certifier. So in his ideal world, regulation would be done by private certifiers.
Yeah.
The Prospera model allows that. And it's not entirely unusual, right? So Dubai does this, for example, for hospital accreditations. So you still have a health authority, but the health authority accredits regulators, just like auditing firms, to do the specific detailed work, right? And then if one of these auditors or private certifiers mess up, they can take away their license. So in Montana, we decided not to go all the Prospera way, right? Because that's too ambitious within the US legal framework. But we decided basically to introduce the Dubai model, right? So there is a new license under the Montana Health Department. So you can be licensed to have a clinic that gives these experimental treatments to people. And that clinic needs to have research and scientific oversight, right? And that research and scientific oversight, basically you need to go to that institution, which we will be, with post-phase 1 data. And then we say go or no go. And then the clinic is allowed to use you.
So okay, I'm understanding broadly. I think the part that I'm missing here is it sounds like between the both of you, you're bridging the gaps of the FDA. But I'm not clear. Like, what is it that? Why can't Montana do everything that it wants to do? Why does it still need Prospera, and vice versa? Why cannot Prospera do everything that it wants to do? And needs
Infinita, you mean?
Infinita, thank you.
So the question is, there's several things. One is there any process for oversight? Or can just any hospital say, I'm deciding on my own, I want to do this treatment? You know, the Montanans are actually quite libertarian. And in fact, the senator that was working on this wanted this. But, you know, loads of people said, I think justifiably, that's going a bit too far, right? Because, you know, if something happens, then the FDA or federal will crack down on it, right? So the idea is you need to establish a model, so similar to the Prospera concept, most advanced yet acceptable, right? That is something that can last long term. Right, so the idea was that you have explicit oversight through the license and through these scientific oversight bodies, right? Because what they do then in effect is the same thing as the FDA, right? So they are assessing the data for the quality, right? And they can do it based on the assessments, based on the data that other regulators have collected before. So this way you get the medical reciprocity in the United States.
So make sure I'm understanding here. You're saying they're not ready to do their own trials and certifying whatnot. You still want to do that in Prospera, but then you know, once you have it in Prospera, you can
Montana and Prospera treat them as separate, right? So there can be going from one to the other, but you can also be a business or a patient in Montana and not ever have heard about Prospera, and vice versa as well, right? So I would see these as two separate things.
I agree.
And so, so why do they need us or our company to do this? Basically, I think because it right now doesn't work yet, right? And we are creating a model through which it can work, right? Otherwise, it would be just another right to try law that's not yet used. And I think we took a bit the learnings of Prospera and also the Honduran framers in thinking forward. All right. Right now, we have a very aligned administration, but we want to create a legal framework that can outlast the administration, and that's defensible. And that's what we're attempting in Montana with this new framework.
I have a question about the Montana framework. I've been meaning to ask you, by the way. This is a great video for it. I'm going to use an example for it because this will also help convey the question, like the kind of context for the question I'm asking. All right. Imagine I am Pfizer. Okay. And I've got an awesome new treatment I want to do. Right now, even if you have a robust right to try system, let's say I'm part of the team that developed this drug and it works really well for something, whatever, and I want to use the right to try for it. The problem is right now, at least, I go to the chief medical officer at Pfizer, right? And I say, hey, we've got this really cool drug and we can sell it to people under this Montana right to try legislation. I really want to do that. That chief medical officer is going to look at me and say, are you out of your mind? We spent $4 billion developing that drug. And if there's even a 1% chance that there's an adverse outcome and therefore we have legal liability, so this is the key question I was going to ask you, that we have legal liability for that outcome, now the FDA could use that to crush our process for the $4 billion we've spent to develop this drug because we have that legal liability. Yeah. How is this addressed? I've been meaning to ask you this. How is this addressed in the Montana framework?
Yeah, I mean, the Montana framework has several liability waivers that you can do, right? So the patient can sign a waiver liability. Obviously, that's on its own not strong enough, right? Because there is some federal law that can supersede it. But it is, there's levels of strength. New Hampshire actually has an even stronger civil liability waiver. Again, these are all never 100% strong, but at least they provide you with a very good argument if something happens. Mm-hmm. And then what's important is actually for the federal part, right? So how do we know that the FDA won't use it against me? That's where you actually need the FDA and HHS to say explicitly that they won't, which we're hoping they could potentially do under the current administration, yep. Right? So, can't say any details or whatever, but I'm spending some time in DC to, get some attraction for that idea.
And so, if I understand correctly, if that happens, Infinita is in Prospera, but it can be in Montana, it can be in different places.
Yeah.
Right.
So basically, we're creating a new entity, the private certifier entity. That's initially sort of a Montana entity, but how it looks like in practice is like an IRB, an institutional review board. An institutional review board typically has 5 people, and they're approving research. Right. So if you want to do a medical study, you need to go to an IRB. We're basically taking the same idea and applying that to post phase 1 approval on the right to try. So if you want to get a new drug into Montana and allow the clinic to treat patients with it, you need to go to this sort of Montana IRB, or they will call it an ETRB, Experimental Treatment Center. So what my goal is, I want that structure basically to be reciprocated in other jurisdictions, right? So in Prospera, we basically mirror that structure, right? So there's the same oversight body, the same scientists. So there will be some very well-known scientists on there. But if they give the approval, the same approval also counts in Prospera. Because there's the automatic reciprocity. And then what we do is we go to other US states and jurisdictions and also try to get laws that reciprocate these bodies.
Got it. And so is that valuable for Prospera, or like it's great for Infinita, but like doesn't that make Infinita like a company that is across basically reducing the regulatory arbitrage, pushing for the reduction of the regulatory arbitrage that benefits Prospera?
Yeah, I mean, what was this effect-Jevons paradox or something like that? Right. So in fact, I think we're creating a bigger market size this way, right?
And you're making a huge market for healthcare and for Infinita, but what would be wouldn't the incentive to come here to Prospera lower?
They already have like 10 times more biotechs for whom this is more viable now that they have an option to go to the United States.
Correct.
There's more among them that, as a result, could also use Prospera, where the phase 1 part can be done more cheaply.
So basically, you can do the initial drug investigatory stage, the rapid iteration. So this is a key element of what you can do in Prospera that you can't do elsewhere, right? It's like you can now apply the SpaceX, rocket development model to drug development here in Prospera compared to the NASA model, right? So just to contrast the two, right? For people that aren't aware, for the NASA approach to, developing new rockets, whatever, it has to be perfect and work the first try before you're ever allowed to test anything. SpaceX says, forget that. We're going to develop a new rocket and blow it up. And then we're going to learn why it blew up, and we're going to do that again until it stops blowing up, right? The kind of analogy here is in Prospera, you can do that rapid drug development and iteration on a very much like N=1 scale with complete free, prior, and informed consent. And as long as you can demonstrate safety, importantly, then you're allowed to, under the strict consent framework, test this very quickly with people, collect lab data, and see like, all right, this didn't do anything. Like we knew it was safe, so that was fine, but it didn't actually affect the thing. Let me try this different compound. Instead of spending literally $1 billion or $2 to just do that first part. This is why a lot of pharmaceutical companies, there's less pharmaceutical innovation now at all. To do that process I just described, you basically have to be certain that the drug is like going to be safe and efficacious and work for the exact thing you need to do in order to justify spending billions of dollars to even get it to that point before you do anything with it at all. So you can much more rapidly iterate and innovate. Then you can even be developing revenue from that here in Prospera. So you find a winner, right, that was proven safe, and then it turns out to be efficacious. You're developing revenue for that with medical tourism. You're collecting actual real-world clinical data that then you can go use to justify to the Montana board, like, hey, I have real-world clinical data that proves this worked from Prospera. Let's do it here.
Look, so there's biotechs post-phase 1. For most of them, Prospera is, maybe for some of them, but for very few of them, it's the right candidate, right? Because they're going phase 2, phase 3, and that's already when the big acquisition happens. Why would they risk that?
And that's when you need a ton of people,
Exactly.
Importantly. Like you just need a large population.
Exactly. So Prospera should, under this model, ideally, we specialize in phase 1 trials.
Got it.
Because these are like 10 to 50 people, and you can do it much more cheaply. And then we can reciprocate that in Montana. So that means by building up Montana, I can get a much bigger early stage phase 1 and pre-phase 1 pipeline.
That makes sense. Okay, so I get it, and I think it makes it very obvious what the next steps for the biotech side of Prospera are, right? Like you're pushing this, you make this really work. You have the labs, you have the clinics, and all the things, and you get more and more of these companies to do this. So that makes sense to me. And then going back to the mental framework that we had of the supply and demand. So that means that for you guys on the Prospera side, okay, now we have this industry that's working. It's an anchor industry. We're getting workers from these pharmaceutical companies coming here to live here, I guess, clinics and all that. And they are forming a first kernel group of people to seed the local community. What are other ways in which you're thinking, okay, let's accelerate these growth?
I mean, I would think actually we are in a decent place now, and we have activated some really amazing people to join us that can do and are doing more now in real estate and digital nomads, right? So I think digital nomads is actually very underrated as a category because it has this feeling or this idea of, oh, these are people who are transitory, they're not staying somewhere. But actually the typical digital nomad is a digital nomad only 2 years. and then they settle somewhere. And they settle somewhere they like it, which is actually 100% how it happened for me and my wife.
That's why they're here.
Exactly. We were digital nomads for 2 years, and then we came to Europe.
Exactly right. So a big part of it is building out much more real estate inventory. We're like completely sold out on basically everything right now. The tower over there, so like everything is completely full. So we've got a bunch of projects in the pipeline.
Okay, hold on. This is crazy. What I'm hearing you say is that you are capped on demand from real estate.
Yep.
Why?
It's just literally for the reasons we were talking about earlier, from the political risk, financing to build new buildings. That's it.
Didn't get that bank and debt funding. So
as
the
soon
tower
as
was financed from like equity.
Yeah, it was financed by private investors basically. So once you clear that hurdle, now you can get traditional, construction financing, the normal real estate playbook. We have massive real estate demand already, and this is without a specific, marketing campaign or growth campaign on digital nomads or others. There's a very long list of people that have very explicitly said they would want to move here if there's more real estate. So we've got a number of projects underway at a very variety of like kind of designs and scales and those sorts of things.
Tell me all the numbers you can tell me so that I can understand. My understanding is like there's already 200 full-time people working here, and then how many part-time or like
there's another
at any given time there's how many people in Prospera?
Yeah, at any given time there's a couple hundred. So call it like 300.
So there's usually 200 settlers and then 100 transients.
Correct, on any given time. So we have several thousand. I don't know what the latest number is because it's been growing super fast. Well over 2,000 signed up e-residents, which buys you access to the jurisdiction. If you can come like actually do stuff here, stay here for a while, whatever you want to do. And so those like just come and go with events or just to come visit, to come hang out for a while, to come work here for a while, whatever the case may be. And then a much longer list, well over 10,000 of people that have explicitly, when they signed up, said like, hey, I would love to either like buy or rent real estate or come stay there for a while.
And this is they manifested their interest rather they haven't paid anything on the escrow or something. They just say, hey, I'm interested in coming.
Correct. But the proof we have for that is that everything we currently have that we could sell is sold.
Okay.
Like we literally are 100% out. So we got to build more real estate, satisfy that demand. The digital nomad market is a big one. And then totally orthogonal to that, but just as a segue of another market we are targeting, right, is obviously there's a big push from the current administration in the United States and because of general international relations for nearshoring, right? And what that is a political term. All that means is like you're a company, an American company, manufacture stuff in China or the Philippines or wherever. You want to move closer to the U.S. It is a reasonable business move if you have a place to go where you can have legal stability, property rights, clear rules that allow you to operate more efficiently and effectively, all those sorts of things. So which we have a sister site. It's going to be our second hub that we're developing right now on the mainland in La Ceiba, right next to the port, like touching and adjacent to the port. So for that build out, we've been in discussions with some, I can't name them, but large development finance organizations and institutions that now that there's a friendlier administration in play are very interested in financing the build out and the dredging and the expansion of the port there so we can have larger post-Panamax size vessels come in for actual scale. We're talking to, I can't say the name yet because I don't want to yet, but we have a couple of large healthcare manufacturers that manufacture healthcare devices at scale in China and in other Eastern countries right now that have reached out to us and are very interested in nearshoring into that particular project. So then you have La Ceiba developing, but then that also feeds the project here in Roatan, right? Because what you can develop there is the kind of Shenzhen, Hong Kong model that developed there, where you have the factory employees and people there living in the housing we'll build over there. But then maybe you have the executives of those companies, the upper management, whatever, living and working here in Roatan. So that's why we're building out more residential real estate. So that creates a positive feedback loop. Then let's go back to finance for a second. Once you have the legal stability and explicit recognition and support from the Honduran government, well, now you can form a bank in Prospera when let's say they're trying to sell stuff into the U.S. So the U.S., SEC or other financial regulators then reach out to Honduras, say like, hey, is this legit? Now the Honduran government says, yeah, here you go. Here's our approval of these things. Here's our partnership agreement with the Prospera jurisdiction to recognize these banks. Now you can start actually developing financial institutions here. And there is some regulatory and legal improvements you can make at that point while still complying with the existing international standards. As we mentioned, those are inflexible. But there's a number of other things you can do kind of on the margins to improve how you can operate and innovate as a financial institution here, which doesn't need a lot of land and typically kind of begets higher density. And then, so getting to the medium to long-term plan here, right? So now you have three real industries that would be formed here by this point. We have biotech that we've just talked about. You have finance, and then you have the manufacturing nearshoring, right? Well, now there's a positive feedback loop, right? The manufacturing nearshoring firms have access to capital right over here. Biotech firms have access to capital right here. And now there's manufacturing facilities over here that they can contract out to ship straight to the United States. Takes like 2 days instead of 40 days from China. So now you've developed, talking about agglomeration effects earlier, we talk about this and think about it all the time. Now you've created a flywheel and agglomeration effects where these industries, because they're clustered together so closely, can interact with one another very fluidly to accelerate each other.
Got it. Super interesting. So I'm gonna go step by step in some of the things that you mentioned. So then back to the thing. So you said there's 10,000 people who manifested their interest in buying, and right now everything is sold. Do you also have for rent, and is that full? Like, and how much flexibility there? Because maybe, what I'm curious is, why don't you have like temporary housing, for example, and things like this?
Yeah, we've thought about doing some of those things. The bottom line is we want to build for like a longer term durability. And we, on the rental front, people coming in and out just on any given month to month, the actual physical occupancy, like are 100% of, say, the apartments in the Duna Tower, is someone literally in them any given month? That's not at 100%. That might be 1 month 50%, the next month 95 or something.
Okay,
but it oscillates.
So you
some.
Still have some room for people who might want to come, even for long term, but renting.
Correct.
Got it.
That's exactly right.
So there's just much more demand for people who want to buy.
Correct.
Huh? Why?
Because they can see the same strategic kind of implications. Like the real estate is obviously going to massively appreciate as all of these things develop, and then they can come here to events like this that we're at here this weekend. This Liberty and Acceleration Summit, and they can come to these things and see the energy on the ground, see the companies that are moving here, that are doing things here, and see, oh yeah, obviously this is going to work out. I want to get in early. It's like the analogy from their perspective is like, oh, I can buy into Miami or San Francisco before it became, a major finance center, and they can see the real estate appreciation there, except it'll be even higher here because of the legal and regulatory advantages, right? So the businesses can grow faster.
And so that makes sense. There's you guys of course need to be careful there because you don't want to build a ghost town, right? And so how do you guys think about that?
Correct. There's a number of ways we do that. The first is like we do real estate because we are forced to, not because we are a real estate company. So once the political settlement happens, which means you can get traditional development firms, traditional financing, what we'll seek to do there, and we're already in active talks for, there's a few projects that are going on right now that some community members are leading as third-party developers, where the market, like real estate developers that are not us, and maybe we reach out to them, bring them, maybe they reach out to us, they're building things. Now it's in partnership with us, maybe we contribute land as equity capital. Obviously, we'll help make sure the legal and regulatory process is as quick as possible. But the third-party developers let the market, in other words, tell us and build what is in demand here, right? This is a key, like, kind of conceptual insight, right? One way a lot of these ghost towns happen is because they're master planned from day one. So they say from day one, here's how much we're going to build and where we're going to build it and what we're going to build, and it's completely inflexible. But you don't know, you build the first 25%, and then it might turn out that the market is actually demanding you build something completely different for the next 25%. But you're a master planner, so you said, no, I know what needs to be done here. The market's wrong. We look at this completely differently and say, all right, the market should determine within the, past this initial kind of priming the pump phase where we're directly involved in developing the things, we want third-party developers to be coming in and building these things in partnership with us, or maybe not. Maybe they just build it and then they go through the approval regulatory, and we're not involved financially at all, but they're just building something cool.
But they're interested in selling the places, not in having them inhabited.
Depends on exactly who is building what. So as a concrete example, right, one of our community members that's building a project called Darian here, obviously he lives here. So he's building this because he wants more people to be here that he can hang out with. That's a one-off example. But the real estate developers as well, just in traditional kind of real estate industry, right? Your units are only going to be sold and then be worth something if some people want them for something, right? Whether it's for short-term rentals and then they just come stay occasionally, or they want to actually live and move here. Either way, for your financial model to work as a real estate company, you need people to be there.
But you guys don't want short-term rentals. You want, or like people coming here for a summer thing. You want people to be living here all year long.
Correct, but that takes time. And what we have found just empirically, and Niklas is a great example of this. There's a dozen others me and Niklas could rattle off. The way people end up becoming permanent full-time residents is they come to an event and they're like, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to come to the next event. And they come to the next event. And then maybe a year later, 6 months later.
And you want them to be renting all that time, not buying. You don't want people to actually buy and say, okay, I'm just going to come here.
Correct.
Once a year.
But, if that's what the market's demanding, they want to, sell them and then people can rent them out short term, they will. But now, obviously, we are steering toward and trying to make sure that the products that are being developed here, to your point, exactly right, targeting families, for example, so that you can move the whole family instead of just targeting individually digital nomads, although that's a market we're targeting too, as Niklas mentioned. So yes, the long-term goal is a dense population here. But we have just found, just learning feedback from the market, the way that ends up happening is through people come a series of short-term trips and then eventually commit.
Got it. And so you said master plan, like we don't do master plan.
We have a
we do
master plan, but
exactly.
it's quite flexible.
Okay.
It's more like indicative. It's like, hey, here's what this could look like. But like, this particular plot right here where we have, marked for a mixed use, commercial district. If a developer comes along and says, you're wrong, I want to build a multi-story residential tower there and I'm going to develop it, go for it.
Is that master plan public?
It is not.
My fear there is that master plans are designed in a way that does not create very livable communities, which is also a problem that I've experienced a little bit here in Prospera, right? So how do you guys think about this?
This is a key kind of factor for us. It's actually why the reason our master plan is not public, because it's very low fidelity. And the reason it's low fidelity is it's basically an indicative direction for us. It's a starting point. It's a thing that we can point to and say, we've thought about this some. Here's how we're thinking about it right now, but this is going to heavily change.
Okay.
And then we, because of the current land ownership, right, within the jurisdiction itself, our real estate holding company, St. John's Bay Development Company, owns most of the land, if not all of it. I'd have to go check. Call it most of it, just to be safe. Well, we could be strategic, not at a jurisdiction level, but at a company level. Of, well, all right, what are you building? Are you building you're trying to build a casino? Well, you can't do that with our existing regulations anyway. But you're trying to build something, right, that like does not behoove the long-term livability, walkability of the community. Well, we might just say no to that because it's not going to benefit the long-term livability walk. If you're trying to build a big complex with a giant parking lot, like almost certainly we're going to say you could build a complex. You're not building the parking lot. We did this with Duna, like the Duna Tower. The parking, as you've seen, is the first 4 floors of the building. It's inside of the building itself, so that there's a lot more space. That you're not wasting land on parking lots, for example, right? That is like step one of like unwalkable communities. Just go to any city in America. There's parking lots everywhere.
I think in general, my mind goes to is also a challenge of vertical integration in general, right? So the risk is when you do too many things and, the governance part and the building real estate and managing real estate, these are all very different things, right? So these are typically only done, you're diluting yourself, right? If you're not focusing on one that you get really good at, then you risk not doing anything well. On the other side is the challenge, if you need to do something like this, which is completely new and you have like a very cohesive vision and you're not doing it yourself, then not everything you can ensure it's following your vision, or you might have like a fragmented customer experience and things like that. So I think that's kind of a very real struggle and something we're, I think to some degree, still figuring out as well.
You learn as you go along.
So
we try to bake it into the legal and regulatory system, the governance system as well, though.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, this is kind of a Gaussian optimal size of the firm kind of question, or like a.
I hear you, and all of these like mental frameworks make sense to me.
Yeah.
Two thoughts about this. One is, unfortunately, making new jurisdictions is extremely hard, and you do need a lot of these disciplines, and it's just the nature of it. And some of these things you just need to have. And in the case of urbanism, it's one that I feel like is the one that's the highest gap between the interest that I'm hearing in all these new jurisdictions and what I actually believe the interest should be. And I believe that one of the reasons why this is the case is because many of these founders are American or have had this type of lifestyle, which is one where that's very car-centric and where there's not that many livable communities. And so the mental frameworks that they use are actually not the best ones to create new communities that are very livable.
Yeah, I can assure you that is not the case for us, precisely because we kind of learned these lessons. So one of our, someone we've talked to many times, not like a formal advisor, I don't think, but we've bounced our master plan and our thinking off of many times. Alain Berthaud is his name, a great urbanist. Wrote Order Without Design, and his basic thesis is, given a set of conditions, like you should optimize for a walkable, livable community, but also let these things kind of develop organically rather than kind of pushing them top down. But then those two are a little bit in tension, and in our particular case, as Niklas said, it's a fine line to walk. I'm just more pointing out, like we've worked with Uwe Brandes, a great urban planner and architect in the United States, who is one of our advisors. We've worked with the Zaha Hadid architects extensively on this, trying to make sure like even at the planning stages and the ideas we have in the master plan, it remains a very walkable community. We even have prioritized things like, making sure we have like rentable, e-bikes we had for a while. They just put them a lot of demand for them. I think we still have them, but we're not using them right now, so that people can get around more easily, like on foot without it being car centric. We even evaluate development projects on this basis. So like if you, unironically, if you come to us even right now and said, I want to build this thing, and it's not a walkable, livable community, we're going to say, all right, as the developer, not as the jurisdiction, but as the developer, the current landowners, we're not doing this deal until this is a walkable, livable community, precisely for the reasons you mentioned, because our team is quite international, right? Like one of our co-founders, Gabriel Delgado, from Guatemala. So he knows, from Antigua and other, like what this can look like, and it has had a heavy influence on making sure that happens. So I don't want to paint the impression we're not thinking about it.
I hear you. That makes sense, and I love the pushback. I'll keep pushing back because I think this is fun, and I think it's so important. So I'll push back a bit more, and this is something I mentioned to you last year. If this were true, I would see everything around the Duna building more build up, more businesses, more residential, and much more live. And I don't see it.
Oh, yes. This is, we would love that too. This goes back to my point earlier about the political instability and unable to get financing for these things. Like, I'll give you a concrete example. I don't know if whatever. We had originally planned to build 4 Duna towers right next to each other with a commercial plaza. It was a much bigger thing that was exactly what you're talking about. I can show you the renders on my laptop later. It looks super cool. And we started building the first one. Presidential election happens. The backing for the other 3.
Okay.
So we literally had this plan from day one, basically, of exactly doing that. It was just the political instability that caused it. And then for the case of some of the other parts of the jurisdiction, like, for example, getting from the hotel sucks. We know that. We don't enjoy it either. It's just literally
the reality of the land that you have.
The connective tissue. That's exactly right. Or and then the resort itself, we bought as is. Now, once we have more capital, especially on the real estate entity, we have, again, in the master plan and everything, plans to develop that in phases in like these walkable communities that will eventually connect. So like, each phase is, a walkable community right there next to the hotel itself. And then another one a little further up that road in one of those little kind of hollows where the road curves. We have a master plan for a mixed use residential and commercial development there that over time ends up as these develop and grow and get filled and built, then the whole thing becomes a cohesive, walkable, and very livable community development. The reason not like that right now is just very simply the political instability, prohibiting access to capital, and then those assets we bought as is, basically. So we're having to build around them.
So that makes sense. And then that's the first part of what you said around the future of Prospera, right? So if I go back to what we were saying, is you were talking about the finance, you were talking about the onshoring, you were talking about biotech. We talked about biotech already. And then and I understand what you mean about the port. That makes a lot of sense to me. There's other parts of Prospera, right? What are the plans for those?
Yes. So these are, and I'm flagging this very explicitly, the plans for them are much less developed because, we had, at the time, before the presidential election, we had a lot of plans to grow very quickly, had everything lined up because everything was hunky-dory, basically, had a friendly administration, et cetera. So a lot of these were just put on pause, and therefore we stopped even developing them beyond the rudimentary stage until we had more clarity, because it didn't make sense to waste resources on that right now when you can't do it in a couple of years anyway. Having said that, there's other larger plot of land on the eastern end of the island that's part of the jurisdiction. It's not owned by us. It's a different landowner. It's currently literally just beautiful, pristine, but raw land. There's nothing there at all. Like literally, it's just jungle basically and woods. And that would be another kind of residential community, much less like commercial, industrial focused, and much more on just being a community as you've described it, a livable, walkable, medium to high end development where, perhaps, and I'm talking, 15, 20 years out here, but, maybe you're working in a finance firm who has a headquarters and an office, here in the Beta District or here in Las Fernandes and the Pristine Bay development area. And then maybe you live and, do your day to day, and your grocery store and, your kid's school and everything is in that development, for example. Kind of like, this is a bad analogy because it's not going to be this high end, obviously, but like it's the closest I could come up with off the top of my head is like, the Manhattan, New York finance to the Hamptons or something. It's not going to be the Hamptons, obviously, but that's the closest analogy I can think of off the top of my head. And then, of course, But
you guys don't own that real estate, you said, and so what's the incentive there?
We have a partnership with them, so there's economic upside for the both of us. And then, of course, for us, so again, this is why it's cool to have the private interest aligned with the governing institutions as well. is we have an incentive to, maybe take a deal that if you're just a real estate developer, doesn't otherwise make sense. But it makes sense for us because, now there's more people living there and working there, and there's developments there, and there's business activity there, which brings in the governance revenue, right? So you can take less upside, just hypothetically. I don't even know the details of that particular deal, to be honest. You could take more upside or less upside, on the real estate portion because you're growing the governance revenues and other service revenues that you might be able to get.
Got it. And so now, so that we've talked about the mainland, we talked about this one, we talked about the two that we have, and there's a fifth one, right? It's just a building, if I understand correctly.
Correct. It's just it was a kind of happenstance thing. It was it was before the presidential election, and we just desperately needed more office space and did not even have time to build it. Like we had a client and a deal signed and needed a place to put them.
Okay,
so that's how that one came about.
And so what other physical expansion are you exploring? Or would you want?
Not in Honduras, not a lot. I mean, obviously, this connective tissue land, we call it, between here and the Pristine Bay development, some of the land here in this general area to grow that cohesive footprint a little bit. It'll end up being like roughly the size or a little bit bigger than Monaco, for example. But other than that, nothing concrete and specific here in Honduras behind those specifically. Now, of course, we're exploring getting enabling legislation so we can expand into a variety of other countries, both in Latin America and in the United States. To do a similar style kind of special economic zone developments with greater or lesser degrees of the.
What's the value in having another one of these?
So our long-term vision for Prospera has always been, and by long-term I literally mean like 50 to 100 years here, right? But this is a multi-generational project. Is to have an interconnected network of these hubs of economic activity and human flourishing around the world. Eventually, you get to a point. You say you have 25, 30, maybe 50 of them even. Let's get wild here. Then what you can develop then as a result of that is our governance platform, the eProspera system, works the same. It's the same software platform and everything in all of these. So if you're an entrepreneur or a resident, whatever, you can seamlessly move between them. You create economic ties between them because the legal and governance system is roughly the same.
Why would you want to seamlessly move from them?
Well, digital nomads like this stuff a lot, and it's very like you're not having to get a new visa or a passport for the place. I'm assuming here in other developments we'll work out a deal with the enabling legislation to be able to do this kind of stuff. It's part of the whole plan.
And so but that makes sense. It makes sense I think right now. But back to your point, you're nomad for a couple of years of your life. You are settled for like 30, 40 years, and so it sounds to me like you want to optimize eventually 50 to 100 years. For the settled population, not the nomad population. So
correct. The incentive here for more hubs is much less about a specific business model thing. It is just catalyzing the most prosperity in the most places for the most number of people, full stop. So even if you have a hub somewhere that is not like, there's no tie directly physically to other Prospera hubs and developments, that's fine as long as that one's flourishing and people are flourishing there.
I hear you. I think what I'm hearing you say then is though that there's not a lot of network effect value in having many of these. However, because of agglomeration effects, you in fact want to have as many people in one single place. So it sounds like actually it would be a detractor to have many more places.
These things are subject to what are called Thibault effects. There's an economist named Thibault. And what that means basically is the kind of jurisdictional competition and agglomeration effects are quite geographically concentrated. Such that, and markets are big, right? Kind of just globally, generally. So sure, it wouldn't make sense to have, hub 3 and 4, let's say, in Honduras. But Guatemala, sure, no problem. You're an entrepreneur that is in Mexico or Guatemala, and you'd rather go to Prospera Guatemala instead of go here.
I don't know about that. I'm thinking back to the Middle East, where you have Dubai that clearly grew there, and there's a lot of competition between Dubai and Riyadh. And when you look at also the size of cities and how cities emerge, there's a very much a factor where the bigger the city, the more it sucks in the population from around, right? And so you end up having a fractal structure of lots of small cities, then bigger one and bigger one, and the huge ones. They have this space around it where nothing else can grow because they are absorbing everything. And so, yeah, that's surprising. Yeah.
Totally. But even think to your example there, like let's take the biggest urban sprawl in the United States, which is Houston, right? The Houston suburbs technically extend like an hour and a half to 2 hours outside of Houston. Well, to translate that to geographic terms, right, where you have that kind of suctioning effect, well, 2 hours is a long drive, but it's not actually that far physically. In terms of the overall kind of market dynamic. So you could have another, large scale city, and you have Dallas and Fort Worth, you have Austin, you have San Antonio, that are all developing. And the other key, there's a
But they're far away.
Yes, exactly. So this is kind of constrained to even a couple of hours drive, basically. And then there's two other points I wanted to make. The first is it would not make sense for us to develop an identical industry focus in a Guatemala Prospera, right? Because then, yes, you are just directly competing for, say, American entrepreneurs. Like, how do I pick it looks the same, right? So by definition, if you're doing one that's in the same hemisphere, maybe even, or within a couple of countries, you're not going to target the exact same industries because that doesn't make sense. Then you are just competing with yourself, basically, at kind of that scale and with that occurring. And then the other thing is not all of these are going to be cities, importantly. This is why I keep using like Prospera hub, jurisdiction. I'm using those words on purpose. It's because, sure, here our end goal is to develop a dense city. Other places, it might just be a industrial manufacturing center that happens to be mixed use because we wanted to make a place nearby so that the workers don't have to travel far and we can still make a walkable community. Another one might be purely a research and innovation hub that's just like basically a university town, right? It's not necessarily a city per se. Others might just be literally residential communities. Who knows what these kind of end up looking like? Anything that we can develop in places that are establish enabling legislation and that we can create things that allow people to flourish and to unleash their untapped potential can take a variety of different form factors, not just cities. We have to get pinned into this. This is our own fault because we talk about it a lot. But it's not just that we want to develop cities over time. It's we want to develop hubs of prosperity. I'm using those words intentionally, and jurisdictions where people can flourish. That might take a variety of form factors depending on the specific market conditions, demand, and what's there.
I do tend to agree, though, there might actually be a very good case for concentration. I do think the argument for network effects can be very long-term. I guess the question is when they start. So take the reciprocity. Like in my case, I have the medical reciprocity, right? So you can go from there to an even bigger market. And then every big market I add, okay, then it means you have a higher market size as a company entering into the framework, right? So I think there is many more sort of these kinds of effects, but Prospera is just a much fuller stack, right? So I'm not sure you get these in sort of the short or medium term, very long term maybe, all right? So it would have an advantage that you have a financial system that's integrated between different places so you imagine if you're the EU, right? Okay, yeah, so you're geographically concentrated by the lands being adjacent, but it's not that the agglomeration effects from place are what's causing that. What's causing that to be a powerful market is the market interconnection, right? Not necessarily the geographical proximity. So in other words, if the EU were sort of countries that were scattered a bit more around the world, but still a single free trade market or whatever, it would still have very powerful single market effects. No?
And in fact, I have a concrete example. It's hypothetical, obviously. Like this is Elon Musk, call me if you want to build a special jurisdiction. But let's imagine hypothetically, okay, for the gigafab thing he just announced, right? The building chips, right? You could imagine Terafab, excuse me, Terafab. Yeah, mixing his other gigafactory with it. Yeah, Terafab. Yeah. So let's imagine hypothetically that was again. I wish this was the case, but it's not. Imagine that's a Prospera jurisdiction, right? Okay. Well, what goes into a chip? A lot of stuff. Okay, silicon. A bunch of other intermediate inputs, right? Well, imagine a world where each of those intermediate inputs is also developed in a Prospera jurisdiction somewhere else, because those rare earth minerals or whatever the case may be, those are just where they are in the earth, right? So you could imagine hypothetically, you have a Terafab, Prospera jurisdiction where the final manufacturing takes place, but the extremely pure silicon is pulled out of the ground literally in a Prospera jurisdiction in Brazil, and another intermediate input. I don't know enough about chips to have more examples, but beryllium is mined in Uruguay in a Prospera jurisdiction, right? Well, all of those then you now have an interconnected network of jurisdictions that have the same legal governance and regulatory framework. It is way easier for that Terafab to source that whole supply chain, assuming there's Prospera jurisdictions everywhere, from the same legal and regulatory framework with the same improved market conditions.
That makes sense to me. There's a big difference though within those, we can use the perfect example of the port that you guys already have. There's a geographic reason why this port is not in Roatan, and that makes sense. If there's a geographic reason, you will have a homegrown industry that emerges into this other place. That's the fuel for the agglomeration effects that emerge afterwards. If what you have is not geographically linked, it's just knowledge, it's just strictly better to have it in the same place. So back, for example, to the university town, if you're creating a university town from scratch, that university town would be 10 times more valuable in Roatan than somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And the perfect example of this is the Bay Area. right? Where like it happened to have this university, but if that university had been in the middle of nowhere versus close to San Francisco, both San Francisco and Stanford and Company would be substantially less valuable.
Totally. No, you're completely right there. And I take your point, by the way. I'm just having fun with the back and
Yeah,
forth.
yeah, I love it.
Because some of this I hadn't actually, because it's so far off, there's always an immediate thing in front of me. So this is actually fun to zoom out. I don't get to do this very often. This isn't more of an intuition, okay? So I don't have like a strong argument here. Just because of my economics background, like the ingenuity of humans and the capability to like invent new like markets, products, and services is like almost infinite, especially if it's massively accelerated by AI. So I have a general like optimistic intuition, basically, that the market sizes can expand almost infinitely, especially if you have like off-world stuff going on, so you can have infinite resource extraction.
For sure.
So I think in the long term here, like there's just room to grow a lot of stuff pretty quickly. I'm not disagreeing with any of the points you just made. Like in my ideal world, if we're doing a university town, like a research town development, I'd put it like right there, total for the reasons you just described. So we know this and are developing in the short term for this. I'm more thinking in the extremely long term. Especially with the just general market growth and economic growth that will occur kind of across humanity. Like there's going to be opportunities. The demand for new places to build things, especially with the conditions to be able to build things, I don't think we'll ever sate. So the more of them we can develop to unleash human flourishing, the better. And I think markets can grow to kind of accommodate that.
That makes sense to me. And so there's a couple of forces I can think that would push for more jurisdictions. One of them is you run out of space. Run out of space, of course, you're going to move somewhere else. And this is an island. And so like I could see that happening. And the other one is what you mentioned, like there's specific areas for some geographic reason might be valuable. For example, I wouldn't be surprised if you figure out a way for Mexico to accept Cedes, having someone close to Starbase, very valuable.
Totally.
Right? So those things I can see. Like if you tell me like Guatemala, for example, I would want to see, okay, what is it that is in Guatemala that you cannot have elsewhere?
Correct.
Because otherwise I wouldn't.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's probably how this will end up developing. Is like there's a very specific, unique, and concrete geographic reason to like have where the jurisdiction is a huge advantage. It unlocks a lot of value in that particular place. I totally agree.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing it today in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Riyadh, especially Riyadh with the UAE, but even between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, like they're fighting for the same companies. Like Riyadh is forcing Dubai companies, like Middle East companies headquartered in Dubai, to move to Saudi if they want to be operating in Saudi.
Yep.
And so like this competition is absolutely gonna
totally. But there's a meta point here, which is why again this is a lifelong purpose and meaning thing for most of us as well. So what that creates and what you've just described is competition in governance. So insofar as we can create more competitors, which means we have to be a better jurisdiction, a better place to live and work, the better for the world. So part of what we want to do overall here, like there's a world here, okay? There's an outcome here. Obviously, I don't want this to happen, but like there's an outcome here where 50 years from now, there's like a couple hundred special jurisdictions that were inspired by or like by the kind of market and the cultural movement we created here in Prospera. Yeah. And maybe Prospera failed. Let's take the extreme case. Literally, we went out of business for some reason. Well, if that happens, but 50 years from now, there's 100 other jurisdictions creating value and creating competition, and I will consider my life a wild success.
Yeah.
Because we created the industry, we've introduced innovation and competition and governance again, and now more people are flourishing as a result.
Beautiful. And with that, I see that it's 3:30 already.
We can continue if you want to. If you have more questions, we'll start.
There's maybe one. I agree with you. And by the way, just one side note on this that I don't know is I've looked a lot into cities. Like I have like 50 articles on cities and like that. So that's where it comes from. The just one maybe aspect, right? So if we go back to these mental frameworks of supply and demand, right? On the demand side, there's the jobs to be done beyond work, right? And we've talked a lot about work. We've talked some about community and livability. To me, there is a big one that is, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, that I think is just not discussed enough, which is safety, right? So we touched on the police, but to me, those are fundamental reasons why both Dubai and Singapore were successful, and Honduras is no Dubai or Singapore. And so how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of angles here. The first is we take this, obviously agree completely, like when people hear first, oh, you're in Honduras, like that's like the second question, right? It's like, wait, hold on, is it safe? Typically, which is a totally fair and correct question to ask. So we work with an extremely talented a security company that has subcontracted from the ZA to do the kind of patrol and security enforcement here. And importantly, and this is where, again, market incentives matter a lot. The way those contracts are structured and with the Prospera ZA's laws as the council have created them, if that company for any reason whatsoever is doing a bad job, they can just be fired and we do a public RFP to replace them with another company like immediately, basically. So there's some competitive forces there, which I just want to flag does not exist in places like the United States, where it's just you have the police and they're have an incentive therefore to do civil asset forfeiture and like bullcrap crimes that then as a result generate them more revenue. It's almost impossible to fire a police officer in the United States. Like for all of those reasons, none of that is true here. So you're just improving at the institutional level like immediately with that. And we consider this like a first order thing that we must provide just as a basic, the same reason there should be water and, there should be property rights. This is up there of the same level of importance as those things. So it's something we take very seriously and have thought a lot about for not just here, but for future jurisdictions as well, about like specific, geographic contingencies that might change how this needs to work. Maybe, in other jurisdictions, if, the part of the special jurisdiction encompasses some criminal law, then you can do some kind of innovations there. I've thought, just to be honest, I've thought less about that because, again, I'm very focused on just making here work. I'm just more flagging this is we've effectively have a high degree of kind of quality of that service provision here already. And it's very first order for us. Like when we're going anywhere, this is like a first order concern. Like, does the enabling legislation enable us to provide way higher quality security services than just like, the local municipality?
And that makes sense a lot to me. So then pushing though, because there's a couple of factors. One of them is the main line, of course, has a lot more crime, I am assuming, than the island of Roatan.
That's correct, yeah.
Right?
Your intuition's right.
Because islands is harder to have crime, but also like it sounds to me like everybody is very there's a kind of an Anglosphere mentality that I assume is less so on the mainland.
Correct. That's because this used to be a British colony
exactly,
until
right.
1862.
I mean, not all ex-British colonies have low crime, as our neighbors in Jamaica can attest. But so I'm understanding. Yeah. So lower crime, but not zero. And there's 100,000 people in this island, and the borders between Roatan and Prospera are porous. So how do you guys think of this?
They appear porous to you visiting here today because we've intentionally, laxed some of it because the people coming in and out are here for the conference. Normally, under normal circumstances, like there's one entrance to, Pristine Bay. There's one entrance to here, the Beta District. We have our security guards that run the gate there. They check your e-residency. It's very easy. You can just pull up your e-residency, QR code they scan, you're good to go. So we have like very tight access control. Normally, we're just intentionally opening it a little bit more for while there's a conference here to lower friction for some people.
Got it.
So that's a temporary thing. Normally, the access control is like quite tight.
Got it.
And then there's another part of this I want to mention, which is directly related, but just a little bit of a shift, which is also like the kind of culture and selection effects of the people that come into the jurisdiction, right? So one of the critical things about Prospera is also from a philosophical perspective, it's a purely opt-in jurisdiction, right? Like no one's ever being forced to come here or live here or work here or stay here. So you're choosing to come. But because of that, on the flip side, because of the institutional design advantages, you can filter on the front end.
Yeah.
So to become an e-resident, especially a physical resident here, you have to go through a full like finance grade KYC AML background. We run your name against a bunch of like open public databases of crimes and lawsuits across the world.
So that makes sense. So what I'm hearing you say is, okay, within the Prospera areas, we're safe, and I buy that because of the couple of things we mentioned, the police and the KYC and all that stuff, and the borders.
And also to mention, Roatan on its own is already very safe, right? So if it was a U.S. state, it would be the fourth safest U.S. state, right? So for whatever reason, I mean, it's very separate from mainland. It's a distinct culture. It's a lot of tourism. So I'm not sure if the public police or what role it plays, but I also do see private security in almost any other resort.
Yeah, they're everywhere. It's not just us that does that. That's exactly right. I mean, to put a finer point on this, is kind of funny. I live in Mississippi, and the capital of Mississippi, Jackson, which I live about 15 miles outside of, is currently, if you just took it as its crime rate alone, is the most violent place in the Western Hemisphere. It's like I don't go downtown unless I am concealed carrying and I have my rifle in my car. I'm not kidding. It's that bad. It is literally a war zone.
Yeah.
So when you contrast that with it's much better here.
Which is a very strong incentive for Americans to come here, less so for Europeans.
Yeah, that's right.
So I see.
Well,
so
Europeans get better tax advantages
yes,
That's true.
than that.
Yes, and I think that's just probably something that I need to look into the numbers themselves to understand orders of magnitude. But so the concern there would be, okay, if most of Roatan was Prospera, and maybe in the future it is, that's fantastic. In the meantime, you cannot have all of your life inside of Prospera, and you don't really want to anyway. So you have interact, and you have a lot of that life is going to happen outside of Prospera, inside of Roatan. And so you want that to be super safe, especially if you're coming here with your families.
Totally.
And so good to know that it's safer than most U.S. states. Probably not as safe as most European countries.
Probably. I haven't looked, but probably.
And
I haven't looked, but you're probably right. Yeah.
if I'm not wrong, like the big like homicide and rape and things like this, like 10x kind of an order of magnitude difference.
Correct.
So I would assume between US and Europe. So I would assume it's less safe than Europe. And so how do you guys think about these aspects? Like you don't have as much control on the safety outside of Prospera, but it's something that impacts deeply one of the core fundamental things that make Prospera good to live in. So how do you think about this?
Totally. So that's why we started in Roatan, because as Niklas was mentioning, just Roatan itself is much safer, just as a general. So that's like site selection is very important there, because you can't control what you can't control outside of the jurisdiction. But then, over the longer term, and this kind of stuff doesn't exist yet for obvious political reasons, but over the long term is what we want to do, which is create cooperation agreements with local law enforcement as well. It's like, hey, this is, again, assume, the jurisdiction is much bigger. We have a lot more kind of capital and stuff going on in the next 5 to 10 years. Well, we'd love to do, cooperation agreements with local law enforcement as well. It's like, hey, we send our guys to, the U.S. to do, annual training with some, elite institutions up there. Send some of your guys, but we'll subsidize it. Send some of your guys to get the law enforcement training in the United States. And let's have cooperation agreements so we can help you guys if you need something, and then vice versa as well. So you can actually improve once you're prosperous enough as a jurisdiction and profitable enough. That gives you the leeway and the resources to be able to reach out to those local institutions and say, hey, let's just, you don't have to pay anything. Let's just, or maybe you do, maybe have some sort of sharing. Doesn't matter. Point is, let's partner and we'll help you guys have better, security and law enforcement operations as well. That becomes possible once you're kind of prosperous enough to be able to do things like that.
Got it. And so that makes sense. So then on the crime side, and then finally, like the other big thing that I think is relevant on the demand side, is education. So for families, especially relevant. If I understand correctly, there's a Montessori school with 60
Correct.
children, most of whom are not from Prospera families, right?
Correct. Some of them are. We just don't have enough. This is something we're actively trying to attract right now. We just literally don't have enough families to have populated the school. So Prospera families use the Pristine Academy, of course, and then a bunch of the island families just are enrolled there to use it there as well.
There's a couple now. The digital nomads brought their families with kids, and they're also the one who want to make it into a family-friendly district. Right. So one of them, an entrepreneur called Daniel, has a company called Nomad Community. Nomad Community. Yeah, exactly. And he had has already 15 families sign up for a program in June, and several hundreds were actually interested. So
Yeah. And so what's the interaction between this thing and the school, right? Because there's a summer camp for the school, but is that the same thing as the Daniel
the
thing?
cool thing about Montessori schools, and I'm speaking a bit out of turn here because I don't deal with the school much at all, but my understanding is at least it's very easy to kind of drop in at your age range. If that existing Montessori has classes for your age, just drop into the existing Montessori flow there while you're in town for a month or 2 months or whatever, and then go back to where they were and they continue making progress along the same track.
Got it. And so that's education. So education is settled there, but you're not sure which ages, right?
It's up until the teens at some point. I just don't know exactly where the cutoff is. I should know this, but I don't remember. And then the medium term, not even longer term, medium term. In fact, this was again a frustrating thing with the political. We were pretty far along and pretty close to a deal with some U.S. universities to set up some pilot programs here to do satellite campuses, basically with some specific.
Yeah, you need to bring Alpha School.
Exactly.
Bring it.
We would
love. There was a guy who said, "Hey, I pitched Joe Lehman," and he said, "Yeah, let's do it."
Yeah, we would love to.
That would be big. That would be good. That would be very, very big. And so maybe one more. So in the community, we talked a lot about the community inside of Prospera, but of course there's 100,000 people outside of Prospera, and so there's reasons why these two communities are separate. There's reasons why you might want to have them together. And especially one of the things that are common, less so here, but very common in other new jurisdictions, is that usually they attract men who are more risk takers than women, and so there's a gender imbalance, which is something that can be corrected with a mix with the internal community. So how do you guys think about this?
Yes, I'm going to let Niklas respond to part of this as well, but I'll just say from our side, so we do a lot to make sure we're like incorporating and including the local community. So, over 90% of the employees here are Honduran, as you see around everywhere. We intentionally try to hire from the local community. We sponsor the soccer team for the Crawfish Rock community right over here. We do like beach cleanups in coordination with the various environmental groups on the island. I could keep rattling these off. Point is, we do a lot with the local community, and even we've done entrepreneurship competitions and pitch competitions and residency programs with some of the existing Honduran universities. So this is very much a thing we're doing regularly in a variety of ways. And to your point, I'll let Niklas respond to this mostly, just because I have thought for years, and we've talked about it regularly, that this gender imbalance thing is a huge problem. I don't have a clear solution to it, really, other than like trying to build amenities, community assets, and maybe even industries that, just by the natural gender divide are more like female dominated here. Like, so for example, we've been working on and trying to develop a fashion district. It's very nascent, but that would be one part of this. But I don't have a clear, this is just a problem. Like, I don't have a clear, this is always, I every time I come to an event that Niklas has put together and I see a bunch of women, I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not doing as badly as some people might think, right?
Yeah.
So I'm quite confident we're like 65-35. And there's no particular reason for it. Like, it's not that we tried extra hard, but I think there were just many awesome women that became part of this. Like my chief of
Maybe healthcare attracts
the healthcare, the biotech,
women.
that could be some reasons for it. But there was also just some pretty awesome women that are part of like my team and joined my team. And like my wife is also super involved in things. And I think many women are attracted or they like it that there's already a community of women here, right? So there's a community now that does yoga quite regularly and has, their own women in Prospera groups and all of that. So I think once there's enough critical mass of that there, that's what also generally makes more women feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So those all sound like within the community, but rather than cross Prospera Roatan.
Yeah, the stuff I was talking about is all outside of the jurisdiction, the beach cleanups and the environmental days and the school days.
Yeah, but those are not ways for correcting the gender imbalance.
Correct. That's a difficult. Is it more difficult than you might think? Also, because let me play this out a little bit. I've thought about it.
Let me say some people actually have found success in the local dating market here.
Have you already seen a wedding between a Roatan person and a Prosperan?
Yeah, Rotan and mainlanders as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So
Absolutely. And then on the conceptual level here, part of the reason this is so hard is because let's say we launch an initiative, whatever it is, to attract more women specifically. Well, it is transparent to the women that we're just trying to attract women, which then begs the question: well, why are you just trying to attract women? What's going on?
I have had this conversation with people in network school. The women want more women.
That's true. The women that are already here, that is very true.
So actually, you don't need to sell it because they some are going to see it as competition. Most will not see it. They just want a gender balance.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree.
It's different maybe if you go for nights, just have parties at night, and you're bringing bus loads of women.
Right.
Right. But I think that's probably not the core.
Well, this is also why we want to bring families, right? Like that, by definition, if you're bringing you're bringing at least one woman. Hopefully, some of their children are women as well. Yes. So, this is something. It's very top of mind.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you guys end up doing. Okay, so what I'm hearing is summarizing the demands for why would people come here. There is the number one thing usually is jobs, and for that you're attracting the two highest regulated industries, especially the highest regulating, and the easiest one to fight against, which is biotech, other one being finance. You're working also on mainland especially to get a couple more. One of them is offshoring. No, actually just onshoring, and between the three of them, there's a network effect. which is crucial. Like a crucial one there is finance, which was blocked because of the politics, which is now unlocked. And so it sounds like now we can start growing the supply of jobs again, which is the core thing for demand, for people to come. It is not the only thing. There are also things like real estate, which is something that you guys are investing in, again, back to finance. There are things like education, where you already have a school. You want to push more of these social art schools, things like this. You want to build more livable areas, which again was connected to finance. There is crime, which is a much weaker problem that would be in other places in Honduras and even in places in the United States. So broadly speaking, and then of course it's beautiful. You have what's the second biggest coral reef in the world?
Correct,
Is that right?
the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef.
That's fucking crazy. And so that's why people should come here.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And the only other thing I'll add is the community as well. And I'll let Niklas speak to this because he's been the instrumental and the driving force behind bringing that community. But as somebody put it yesterday, like you arrive and take a few sniffs of the air of the community here, and he like had an idea for a thing he wants to build. So I'll let Niklas speak because he's been the one bringing these people here.
Yeah, to me, the coolest thing was, all right, I can build a new city and bring the kinds of people that I want to live with. It's like the coolest thing ever, right? So that's also a bit, and I'm selecting the people I'm bringing here because the way you do marketing here, you can't just put up an Instagram ad and hope for the right people to show up. You need to go like very direct, and so Twitter, DM people, things like that. So most people that come here I've actually met somewhere before, and even though at this conference we had like probably more than 100, right? So it's very, very, very personal, but it also means the people that are here, I find like I have a lot of value alliance with. There's like a very strong creation effect. There's an overlap between the things they're interested in. It's probably not like that each and every week you're in Prospera, right? There is lower seasons. Like in lower seasons, you just doesn't happen that you run into someone on that day that's like very interesting on you. But during the conferences, I think especially this one, the last Liberty Exploration Summit, was kind of the kind of peak density and sort of people that are very aligned and building things in the space, like really high quality bio companies and all of that. And the uniting factor is the optimism about technology and about the world in general, right? So I do think even beyond the sort of industry, biotech and crypto, that's on its own an attractor, right? Now with sort of the nomad communities and investing more in amenities, I think there is a good reason to scale that, and a good reason, like the kinds of people from the nomad community were attracted were not the normies, but the entrepreneurs, but the ones who are really like bought into, hey, we're in this for the purpose and the vision for it. So I think there is, community is kind of where it's on its own a big value. I mean, to me, that's part of why I'm doing this, and I think it's also something that can scale. Yeah,
and just the final point on this, the other part that comes along with that is like if you read a bunch of the sociological literature, it is very hard, if not outright impossible, outside of some very specific circumstances, to like intentionally cultivate like a specific culture for a new nascent community like this. But it has ended up, and I was very worried about this early on. I thought about this a lot, like, how do we make sure that it's the right community culture values? And that I haven't thought about it because I don't have to, because just the people that show up here are just like values aligned, culture aligned. They're the type of people that I would want to live around, work around, be around. So that just pure selection effect has by itself started creating a culture. And now, if you come here and you're not, that type of person that will, fit in with and vibe with that community, you're probably not because we kick you out or anything, just it's not going to be your cup of tea.
Yeah.
So that selection effect has started its own kind of recursive flywheel.
That's awesome. Very cool. I'm super excited about what's coming next for Prospera and Infinita, and I finally understand all of this, I think. So so thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you for having us.
This has been a blast. Some of the best questions I've gotten about any of this. I love the detail you get into.
I got to hear. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all.